American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 751 to 775. Africa, Wakanda. Buzz. Accompanied by the buzzing sound from the transmission barrier. Wild Wolf Luo Sha, carrying a breaker Warhammer on his thick shoulder armor, arrived on the dry ground with a displeased expression. He was here to pick a fight with Sai-Fu Luo Sha. However, when he aggressively drove his power armor into the Smart Control Legion, which was constructing large buildings, he immediately saw Sai-Fu Luo Sha teasing a giant crocodile by a muddy pond. And before Wild Wolf Luo Sha could launch a surprise attack on Sai-Fu Luo Sha's broad back, the latter's low voice slowly sounded. "Yo, Wolf Cub, you're here." As soon as Sai-Fu Luo Sha finished speaking, Wild Wolf Luo Sha, who was somewhat slow to react, immediately understood. He couldn't help but grin and say, "I get it, you're deliberately provoking me with words and actions, so I'll come fight you, right? You want me to help you attack Wakanda." Before Wild Wolf Luo Sha could finish his words, Sai-Fu Luo Sha, who suddenly moved his magnetic boots backward, raised his hand and shot dead the giant crocodile that was about to pounce. He turned around with a calm expression, his gaze fixed on Wild Wolf Luo Sha, and said, "Our Primarch needs to stay at the Twin Islands base to handle a lot of homeworld matters, and Iron Man David doesn't have time. Since you're idle anyway, why don't you come help me? How about I make you a special set of vibranium power armor then? You're using something I could easily get as payment. Is that how you Dark Angels do business?" Wild Wolf Luo Sha, somewhat speechless, took a deep breath. He frowned slightly as he surveyed the Smart Control Legion moving building materials back and forth, and asked in a puzzled tone, "What, can't so many Smart Control Legions take down Wakanda? Is their defense really that strong?" Hearing Wild Wolf Luo Sha's question, Sai-Fu Luo Sha smiled slightly, gently shook his Dao steel hand, and said indifferently, "Before you came here, I already discovered Wakanda's defensive loophole. It would only take a very short time to break into their city, but as the saying goes, killing the heart is worse than killing the body. What's the point of simply conquering these black uncles? Tisk, Cypher, you know what you look like right now. A schemer trying to execute a grand plan. You've wasted so much effort, be careful not to fall into a ditch." Wild Wolf Luo Sha grinned coldly, narrowing his eyes as he scrutinized Sai-Fu Luo Sha. He couldn't help but shake his head and say. However, Sai-Fu Luo Sha, with a calm expression, did not continue to bicker with Wild Wolf Luo Sha. The two of them drove their power armor to the front lines of the siege of Wakanda. Rumble. At this moment, around the massive city that was constantly enveloped by an energy shield in midair, the continuous bombardment from the sky carrier had literally shaved off about dozens of meters of land. The soil within a 10-kilometer radius had also formed obsidian-like reflective material due to long-term high temperatures. It seems this Wakanda isn't entirely useless. At least their shield technology is worth our effort. Imagine if every Astartes or every human warrior had similar shield technology, the casualties on the battlefield could undoubtedly be reduced by too much. Wild Wolf Luo Sha said to Sai-Fu Luo Sha beside him, his gaze fixed on the front. "Based on the specific information I've gathered from other parts of Africa, Wakanda's vibranium reserves are not small, but not abundant either, at least not as much as I imagined. Arming Astartes is fine, but the human warriors will have to wait. After all, how much mysterious mineral can a super-large meteorite bring? The only good thing is that the depths of the homeworld's universe probably don't lack vibranium. As long as our mining fleet can find the true source of vibranium meteorites in the future, there's no problem using it to build vibranium ships," Sai-Fu Luo Sha said in a low voice. The next second, he raised a Dao steel hand and patted Wild Wolf Luo Sha's thick shoulder armor. "Let's go, let's personally witness our vibranium production area." How do you plan to get in? Hasn't Wakanda's energy shield been broken yet?" Wild Wolf Luo Sha squinted at Sai-Fu Luo Sha and asked with a grin. Rumble. At this moment, on the ground around the city of Wakanda, incredibly massive ground upheavals suddenly emerged. Then they rapidly spread towards the edge of the energy shield. Immediately after, once those ground upheavals quickly touched Wakanda's energy shield, they continued to penetrate deep into the city's ground without any obstruction. Perhaps the Wakanda are overly superstitious about their vibranium technology, or perhaps Africa has never had a powerful presence that could threaten their city. In short, these guys' energy shield didn't extend underground. Look, the energy shield is gone, and the city has fallen. At this moment, with Sai-Fu Luo Sha's somewhat understated words, the previously silent massive city of Wakanda instantly fell into an even more chaotic state. From the ground upheavals that penetrated deep into the city streets, with a large amount of displaced earth and stones, crab-like machine guards wielding chainswords rapidly drilled out. These smart control legion, without any mercy, swiftly launched a carnage-like fierce assault on all life around them, and also quickly destroyed the mechanical devices that supported the energy shield. Boom boom boom. At the same time, as whirlwind missiles were launched from the broad shoulders of some rapidly emerging fortress-shaped robots, a considerable number of city buildings and streets were instantly engulfed in explosions and fire. Even though more Wakanda forces wielded vibranium weapons in their hands, large numbers of laser beams and vibranium bullets flew back and forth, attempting to resist the mechanical army in front of them. But facing these smart control legion, which emerged like a tide and had no concept of casualties, even the same number of Tyrannid could only retreat repeatedly, not to mention humans who possessed negative emotions like fear. Soon after, when Sai-Fu Luo Sha and Wild Wolf Luo Sha drove their power armor into the city of Wakanda as if strolling, most of the city streets and areas had been completely occupied by the Smart Control Legion. Large numbers of Wakanda with fearful eyes were forced to slowly kneel on the ruined ground under the threat of crab-like machine guards. Our rules are actually very simple. Anyone who lays down their weapons will not suffer the fate of death, but if they choose to rise up and resist, stubborn Wakanda are completely useless to us. Sai-Fu Luo Sha, with an indifferent expression, slowly and gravely spoke to the surrounding Wakanda. Boom. But at this moment, a tall figure, strong and agile, suddenly leapt down from a nearby building, heavily swinging vibranium claws towards Wild Wolf Luo Sha's head. Invaders, die. Just a dozen seconds prior, Rokas, the space wolf, with his heightened, animalistic senses, had already keenly detected the lurker concealed above the buildings. Not to mention, the automatic sensory detection system integrated within the Artificer power armor had also preemptively identified the enemy's movements. HMPH. Instinctively letting out a cold snort, Rokas, the space wolf, didn't even bother to employ the Forgebreaker power hammer resting on his massive shoulder plate. He simply maneuvered his power armor to slightly retreat and dodge. The two vibranium claws, swung abruptly by the enemy, completely missed their mark, and the towering figure clad in black vibranium battle armor was entirely exposed within Rokas's attack range. In the next second, a massive hand encased in ceramite armor abruptly shot outwards. Even though the lurking attacker, who hadn't even landed yet, was no ordinary mortal but a powerful being with special abilities. However, compared to Rokas, the battle-hardened space wolf, the opponent's reaction speed was still slow, as if playing in slow motion. After all, if the native heroes failed to evade a close-range attack, they might get injured and hospitalized. The worst-case scenario would be death and burial. But if the Astartes were even a beat slow, basically, all that awaited them was death or interment within a dreadnought. Thump. Asterisk. In an instant, Rokas's ceramite gauntlet seized the enemy by the neck. As he forcefully raised his thick arm upwards, he also slammed the towering figure clad in black vibranium battle armor heavily onto the ruined ground. Boom. Asterisk. Simultaneously, one of Rokas's mag-locked boots swiftly rose. The cold, heavy metal sole slammed down onto the opponent's chest, rendering the person completely immobile. Hey, SEF, if I'm not mistaken, the only one in all of Wakanda who can wear this kind of vibranium-woven armor is their king, right? At this moment, Rokas, turning his head, grinned at SEF Rokas not far away. He completely disregarded the Wakandan king, who was frantically clawing at the ceramite armor on his leg with his two vibranium claws. Sef Rokas coldly glanced at the humanoid prey still struggling. He suddenly said to the opponent in a nonchalant tone, "Tisk tisk, the guardian of Wakanda, Prince T'Challa, if I were you, I wouldn't continue to struggle. My little wolf cub here has a rather bad temper." No sooner had Sef Rokas's words fallen, as if to verify the correctness of the statement, Rokas, the space wolf, lowered his head and glanced at Black Panther T'Challa, who was still indignant. The Forgebreaker, power hammer, tightly gripped in his palm, suddenly descended, brutally striking the opponent's shoulder. Bang! Even though the black vibranium battlesuit and T'Challa's own formidable physique could withstand a blunt force impact of considerable power, the tendrils of lightning emanating from the Forgebreaker, power hammer easily penetrated the interior of the completely hand-woven vibranium battlesuit, wreaking havoc deep within the flesh and bones, causing Black Panther T'Challa, who had previously only felt anger, to continuously emit uncontrollable screams of pain. "Ah, Sef, you keep the tab for me. He just damaged my ceramide armor, and he'll need to compensate me with even more vibranium ore for my emotional distress." Rokas, the space wolf, baring his teeth, casually hoisted the Forgebreaker, power hammer and turned his head to Sef Rokas, whose overall aura had suddenly turned gloomy. However, at this moment, Black Panther T'Challa, seemingly gradually suppressing the feeling of pain, suddenly roared through the vibranium helmet. "You butchers who invade Wakanda for vibranium! The Panther God Bast will curse all your barbaric acts. All the people of Wakanda will never yield. Wakanda forever! Heh heh." However, before T'Challa's words could completely dissipate in the air thick with blood and the smell of gunpowder, Sef Rokas, who couldn't help but sneer, quickly activated his power armor and stepped forward. His eyes faintly revealing wisps of iridescent purple, he looked down at Prince T'Challa, who was pinned beneath a mag-locked boot, and said in an incomparably gloomy tone, "Wakanda forever. You people are really good at patting yourselves on the back. Is vibranium ore the property of the Wakandan people? Isn't it a vibranium meteorite that fell from the cosmos? Just because you Wakandans discovered it first, does that mean only you can use it? Didn't Iron Man David have a good conversation with you before? Didn't he propose a friendly trade agreement of vibranium for vibranium? How did you respond? Forcing a peaceful mechanical life form to resort to military means, wasn't that a choice made by you Wakandans yourselves? We are butchers. You're wrong. We are liberators who eradicate oppressive forces in the African region. The poverty and disease, hunger and death on the entire continent, how much contribution have you Wakandans made in the past? Should I personally bring the suffering people from other regions to you and confront you face to face, Prince T'Challa?" At this moment, Sef Rokas's series of low-pitched words caused Black Panther T'Challa to fall into complete silence. Wakanda's past policy of isolationism and heartfelt celestial mentality had indeed given them a kind of extreme arrogance in their bones. Now, this extreme arrogance had been forcibly broken and completely shattered by the even more powerful and unreasonable Terra Space Marine Legion. Wakandans may have done many things wrong in the past and taken the wrong path, but they shouldn't have ended up in such a state. As the king of Wakanda, I should die in front of countless Wakandan people. You can do it. After a long silence, Black Panther T'Challa suddenly raised his hand, which could still move. He grabbed and took off the vibranium helmet on his head. Revealing his dark face, full of sweat and pain, he said to the two towering figures in front of him, "Then you can really rest assured that you're going to die, because your people will at most become black slave miners who work hard to mine vibranium, not more corpses. After all, we are a bunch of good people." Rokas, the space wolf, said bluntly without any hesitation. However, just as Sef Rokas, whose aura was becoming increasingly gloomy, casually picked up the White Tiger greatsword from the power armor's waist, intending to give Black Panther T'Challa a quick death. "Release our king, and these Wakandan people around here, otherwise, you'll never get any vibranium technology. I know you're not just here for vibranium ore." At this moment, a middle-aged woman wearing ornate Wakandan clothing and possessing agile skills held a vibranium dagger and took a younger Wakandan girl hostage. surrounded by a large number of Tech Guard Legion troops. They slowly passed by the Wakandan people kneeling around and quickly walked forward. I am Queen Mother Ramonda of Wakanda. Before your mechanical army broke through our city shields, I had already ordered my daughter Shuri to completely destroy all scientific technology related to vibranium, but only retained the complete technological system stored in her brain's memory. If you don't want the war results you finally obtained to become a phantom bubble, then you must do as I say. Queen Mother Ramonda of Wakanda, holding a vibranium dagger against the neck of the dark-skinned girl Shuri, shouted loudly in the direction of SEF Rokas and Rokas, the space wolf, with an incomparably firm tone. SEF Rokas, whose mental state was no longer normal, and Rokas, the space wolf, who was baring his teeth, exchanged glances. Then, the two of them suddenly burst out laughing. Immediately afterward, SEF Rokas, whose eyes were even more bewitching than before, with a hint of purple, slowly said in an arrogant tone full of temptation. Ramonda, right, you can do it now. As long as you kill your daughter with your own hands, I will mercifully spare your son's life. How about it? That's very fair, isn't it? At this moment, everyone present could clearly see that Queen Mother Ramonda's body movements had become slightly stiff. Even the vibranium dagger she held tightly in her palm trembled slightly, leaving a shallow, mottled bloodstain on the neck of the dark-skinned girl, Shuri. However, a few short words from Severus made the wild wolf, Rogel, standing next to him couldn't help but frown, and the ceramite hand holding the forge breaker warhammer tightened unconsciously. Before Rogel, the wild wolf, could notice Severus's abnormality and speak. Ramonda, who was cautiously holding her own daughter hostage, took a deep breath and said in a heavy tone. We Wakanda can admit defeat to you, and the Wakandans can become your vassals or even slaves, but the only bloodline of the Wakanda king for thousands of years cannot be cut off here. I admit that the arrogance and vision of the past have limited all the development of us Wakandans, and also misunderstood the kindness you initially showed, but it was I who decided to launch an attack on your troops, not T'Challa. He is too young, just a puppet king who was forcibly pushed up by me in conjunction with the leaders of various tribes because of the unfortunate assassination of the former king. All the behind-the-scenes orders of Wakanda are controlled and issued by me, the Queen Mother. You can verify this with any tribal leader. Therefore, if someone needs to pay the price for all of this, then I, the Queen Mother of Wakanda, am the most suitable choice. Queen Mother Ramonda's words gradually echoed in the ears of everyone around. Severus, whose face was changing back and forth in place, and Rogel, the wild wolf, with a frown, also maintained a defensive posture ready to attack at any time. They all wanted to see what tricks this Wakanda Queen Mother could play. However, Ramonda, whose dark skin was constantly streaked with sweat, slightly shifted her gaze. With a look of relief, she stared at T'Challa, the Black Panther, who was trying to turn his neck to look at her. Ramonda subconsciously squeezed a fleeting kind smile on the corner of her mouth, and then said softly to him. My child, my king, although I am not your biological mother, I have raised you since childhood. You and Shuri are my most precious children. No matter what kind of suffering you siblings will encounter in the future, or what kind of great changes will happen in Wakanda, I just hope you can firmly remember that hope always exists, and the spirit of Wakanda will never die. May the Panther God Bast forgive my actions. At this moment, the words from Queen Mother Ramonda seemed to make T'Challa, the Black Panther, foresee something. Regardless of his seriously injured body being trampled under heavy magnetic boots, he struggled and roared. Wait, Mother, don't. But at this moment, Ramonda, whose gaze was fixed on Severus and others, suddenly pushed away Shuri, the dark-skinned girl in front of her. With an extremely firm expression, she quickly flipped the vibranium dagger in her palm. Then, she plunged it fiercely into the depths of her towering chest. Until that extremely sharp vibranium dagger easily pierced through her violently beating heart. Mother! Ah! In an instant, the sorrowful screams from the girl Shuri and the grief-stricken roar of the Black Panther intertwined, completely resounding over the ruined city of Wakanda. The Wakanda people around who clearly saw the whole process also subconsciously let out bursts of low, gentle wails, as if they were holding a funeral for their queen mother who had just chosen to sacrifice herself. Thump. At this moment, seeing Ramonda's body falling heavily to the broken ground, Rogel, the wild wolf, whose facial expression was somewhat heavy, couldn't help but loosen the magnetic boots that had been continuously stepping on the Black Panther T'Challa. Letting the other party, with an increasingly painful and distorted expression, climb towards the Queen Mother's body in tears. How boring. When did I promise that as long as she commits suicide to apologize, I will leave the bloodline of their Wakanda king? Hey, dear Prince T'Challa, if you are willing to kill your... Severus, with a gloomy and somewhat distorted expression, stared down at the broad back of the Black Panther with a very evil and arrogant gaze and shouted in a deep voice. However, before the other party could finish speaking, rumble, along with a sudden roar. The Forge-breaker Warhammer, wrapped in wisps of lightning serpents on the hammerhead, suddenly tore through the surrounding air. With a speed and power difficult to trace with the naked eye, it heavily bombarded the side of Severus's power armor, even directly knocking his entire tall body completely to the ground. Immediately afterwards, Rogel, the wild wolf, whose eyes on his cold face were filled with endless anger, suddenly waved the Forge-breaker Warhammer in his palm. He used continuous and fierce heavy blows to repeatedly beat the dark green power armor on Severus's body, while a large amount of ceramite shell fragments were constantly flying around. The low roar from Rogel, the wild wolf, also resounded in the air. Severus, wake the hell up. What were you doing just now? What exactly do you want to do? If you just choose to kill them all, even if you slaughter the entire Wakanda, I have nothing to say from beginning to end. But you should never play with their human emotions in such a despicable way. All your actions are defiling the combat philosophy of our entire legion. This is not your past style. Your current way of thinking and psychological cognition have been constantly corrupted by Slaanesh. Brother, don't force me to kill you with my own hands, try to wake up. In an instant, Rogel, the wild wolf's deafening low roar and terrifying hammering undoubtedly made the countless Wakandans around even more sluggish and confused. Even the Black Panther T'Challa and the girl Shuri, whose dark faces were covered with tears, couldn't help but look towards the direction where the two metal giants were. Bang! As the Forge-breaker Warhammer, which was finally swung with force by Rogel, whose expression was cold, was firmly blocked in midair by the White Tiger greatsword that was suddenly raised upwards. Severus, whose eyes, ears, mouth, and nose were pouring out a large amount of blood, also slowly drove the badly damaged power armor to prop up his entire upper body. Opening his eyes wide, he first spat out the rapidly congealing blood in his mouth. Then, the purple light lingering in the depths of his eyes completely dissipated. Severus, whose mental state also seemed completely different from just now, looked up at Rogel, the wild wolf. He said in a hoarse voice, "Thank you for taking action, brother. I almost capsized in the gutter in some sudden chaotic thoughts. This is really a rare thing. Severus, I knew that your performance just now was not quite right. You usually like to engage in some conspiracies and tricks that I and the Primarch can't figure out, but at least you still follow our consistent attitude of respect towards mortals. But your style of doing things just now, I'm afraid only those mentally twisted and perverted chaos believers would enjoy it." Rogel, the wild wolf, who re-shouldered the Forge-breaker Warhammer on his heavy shoulder armor, said earnestly. He drove the power armor to step forward and reached out to pull Severus, who had returned to normal, out of the depths of the sunken ground. Subsequently, the two people who had just experienced a hammer blow and everything was self-evident also focused their attention on the Black Panther T'Challa and the girl Shuri and others. "I say, brother, what do we do now? Let's follow the rules of our legion for dealing with prisoners of war, transform them all into miners so as not to cause other incidents. In addition, notify Iron Man David and the Primarch that Wakanda has been destroyed and the African region has been unified. Wakanda is undergoing some earth-shattering changes. Automated servo robots wielding mechanical arms are dismantling any vibranium-made objects within the dilapidated city, packaging them up and transporting them back to the Twins Island base. Subsequently, Automated servo robots, having cleared away the majority of the building ruins, will construct new, large-scale buildings on the same sites to house a large number of ordinary citizens. Although the Wakandans have been largely demoted to vibranium miners, things like food, medical care, and basic education haven't been handled too harshly by the Legion. This is because the Legion needs a continuous supply of vibranium ore, not a series of unending minor uprisings. At this very moment, deep beneath Wakanda, near a vibranium vein, Sephiroth, piloting a damaged power armor, is pressing forward with the young woman, Shuri. Soon after, an underground cavern containing numerous ancient buildings quickly comes into view. At the same time, the ground around those ancient buildings is covered with clusters of mysterious plants that emit a faint purple light. This is the heart-shaped herb that each Black Panther Guardian must consume. It greatly enhances the consumer's physical fitness, strength, speed, stamina, and more, granting them special powers far exceeding those of ordinary humans overnight. Although, according to long-standing Wakandan beliefs, only the royal bloodlines of the great tribes can consume it, for ordinary people, the heart-shaped herb is akin to poison. I believe this is merely a propaganda tactic used to deceive the Wakandan people. The heart-shaped herb is actually a mysterious plant born from long-term exposure to vibranium ore. As long as the consumer can withstand the radiation from vibranium, they can probably eat it freely. The dark-skinned young woman, Shuri, with her arms crossed, spoke indifferently to Sephiroth, who was looking around. And as Sephiroth, piloting the damaged power armor, bent down and picked up a ripe heart-shaped herb from the nearby soil, a fleeting hint of joy flickered across Shuri's expressionless dark face. "Hey, Shuri, did you think you could use a little bit of rhetoric to make me eagerly swallow the heart-shaped herb, then happily watch me die from poisoning? Even if these heart-shaped herbs are indeed poisonous, I believe it would be difficult for them to affect the physique of an Astartes." At that moment, Sephiroth, holding a heart-shaped herb in his ceramite hand, said softly without turning his head. As soon as his voice fell, Shuri, whose expression clearly faltered for a moment, quickly adjusted her emotions, and said in a calm tone, "I am merely stating a simple fact. As for whether you believe it or not, that is your business, Lord Sephiroth." And hearing Shuri's incredibly naive goading, Sephiroth, with a wry smile on his face, did not choose to consume the heart-shaped herb on the spot. He slightly turned his ceramite hand, placing the heart-shaped herb inside the temporal crystal. Then, Sephiroth raised his hand and pointed to the blurred ancient murals on the walls of the underground cavern. "Are those murals left here by your Wakandan ancestors? What did they depict?" "The birth of the heart-shaped herb. According to my previous research and analysis, there is indeed content about the heart-shaped herb, but more of the space is used to describe an ancient war that occurred about 1,000,000 years ago." At that moment, Shuri's expression was noticeably more serious than before. She stepped forward, pointed to the first ancient mural from afar, and said to Sephiroth, who was turning his gaze, "This circular object, I believe, represents the ancient Earth at that time, because above the circular object are depicted the symbols of the Wakandan tribes, such as the panther god Bast, the tiger god, the white ape god, and the crocodile god. This also vaguely corresponds to the Wakandan legend of the tiger god and the panther god forming the first pantheon on Earth. The second painting contains some things I don't understand at all. A humanoid figure that looks like it has a huge head comes to warn or declare war on the pantheon. In short, we can see that the original gods in the pantheon then recruited every unknown god willing to join them on ancient Earth, planning for a war. The third painting was somewhat damaged by an earthquake in Wakanda's long history, which is also a point where I suspect that the humanoid figure with the huge head may be an ally, because the other party shows no sign of taking action in the remaining murals, but also does not help the enemies invading ancient Earth. It looks like a judge of the war is observing all the changes in that war. Look, the fourth painting depicts a terrifying scene of an unknown enemy, far larger than a planet, rampaging everywhere in the depths of the universe. Those circular objects that look like shattered spots probably represent the life-bearing planets that the enemy casually destroyed. Moreover, even though the era of these murals is too long ago, we can still see the mysterious texture on the unknown enemy's body, which are like electronic boards. To be honest, I suspect that the other party may be some kind of mechanical life form that is too large, or some kind of alien creature that I have never imagined. At that moment, Sephiroth, who had been listening quietly with narrowed eyes, suddenly interrupted Shuri's narration and said, "I think your idea is not wrong. If I'm not mistaken, that is probably an extremely powerful alien race in the depths of the universe, called the Celestials, by countless alien Xenos. To some extent, the Celestials may also bear the ultimate task of creating and destroying all things." As soon as Sephiroth's voice fell, Shuri, with a slight frown, muttered to herself, "Celestials. Creation and destruction of all things in the universe. No wonder. I think from the Celestials' macro perspective, they are just carrying out the creation and destruction of each planet, but for any race born on the planet, this is a catastrophe. And this also indirectly explains many problems. Look, in the fifth painting, the gods of the ancient Earth pantheon are engaged in fierce battles with the Celestials. Many Earth gods have fallen one after another, including the extremely powerful Tiger god in Wakandan legends, and various similar Earth gods. But the most interesting point is that when the sixth painting appears, the positions between the two sides seem to have completely changed. A terrifying existence representing an unknown force came to the vicinity of ancient Earth from the depths of the universe, causing the Earth gods in the pantheon to have to join forces with the Celestial who was trying to destroy the Earth, and the huge head acting as the judge, to resist that unknown terrifying existence. So, in the last ancient mural, we can see that the guy with the huge head finally fled in serious injury, and even the incredibly powerful Celestial was completely plunged into a state of death, and while countless Earth gods suffered heavy casualties, the terrifying existence, whose state didn't look too good, seemed to choose to stay inside ancient Earth. Most importantly, the recorder of this mural left us with the only ancient word that can be used to call that terrifying existence. In our Wakandan legends, this terrifying existence is called the fairy power that devours all things in the world. It was absolutely impossible for Severus to completely believe the ancient murals recorded in ancient Wakanda. However, the fact that even the Celestials in his vague memory were recorded meant that the whole story had some truth to it. In other words, there was still a powerful force hidden on Earth capable of fighting against the Celestials and the Elder Gods. This probably wasn't good news for the Legion, which was about to unify Terra. However, Severus didn't want to worry too much. Whether it was the hidden monsters and demons on Earth or the terrifying threats from the depths of the universe, they were generally confronted by mysterious beings far more powerful than the Legion. Even if the Legion had to stand up and take on the huge responsibility of protecting the safety of everything on Terra one day, the several Infinity Stones they already had in their hands would at least give everyone some power to resist. When that time came, the Legion could temporarily abandon everything in the Warhammer universe. Primarch Roche would directly recall the entire fleet to Earth and do everything possible to collect the remaining Infinity Stones and snap his fingers at everything in the universe. Inside the Gemini Island base, as the Legion's territory and power continued to expand, the base, as a transit point, became increasingly busy. If it weren't for the teleportation technology developed based on the Space Stone, the movement and transportation of various materials alone would be a huge problem. At this moment, inside the slightly quieter base hall, one by one, destruction-type logic engines wearing green cloaks were demonstrating their movements back and forth in front of Primarch Roche. And Doom, who was dressed almost identically to those logic engine robots, stood beside Primarch Roche. Primarch, these robots are the destruction-type logic engines that I created by combining Tony's mechanical armor manufacturing technology with some of the features and structures of the Castellan robots and Fortress-class logic engines. Of course, I didn't expect their combat power to completely surpass the logic engine Legion, but with the help of a special creation like the consciousness storage device, I can temporarily transform into countless mechanical clones, greatly increasing the progress or inspiration of technological research. Doom, who had lifted his helmet visor, slowly said to Primarch Roche beside him, Primarch Roche nodded slightly upon hearing Doom's words, and he casually asked. By the way, Doom, how is the superluminal engine you and Mr. Fantastic Reed are developing? What is the specific progress? As soon as Primarch Roche finished speaking, Doom took a deep breath, and he said in a careful tone. Primarch, according to the large amount of information we extracted from the alien warship, there are currently about 3 ways to travel long distances in the universe. The first is to use the jump points scattered throughout the universe, that is, to travel and jump through cosmic wormholes. This method is relatively simple and convenient. Any alien race that develops to a certain stage will gradually master it. The disadvantage is that the ship needs to travel near a fixed jump point, otherwise it will be of no use. The second is faster than light warp. In fact, we found that the engine device of that alien warship is not a true faster than light engine. It is estimated that this is also related to the Chitauri aliens being a garbage warship civilization. The engine device they stole from other alien races can only maintain short-term light speed travel within the star system. At other times, crossing the galaxy still requires relying on cosmic wormholes for travel and jumping. In other words, there are indeed more powerful alien civilizations in the native universe that have mastered true faster-than-light engines, but it is estimated that this method must be a non-sale item. If we want to obtain it, we can only go to war, or directly grab it. The third method is Asgard's Rainbow Bridge. We once went to Asgard ourselves under the leadership of Thor to conduct similar experiments. Asgard's Rainbow Bridge can indeed open a cosmic wormhole on the scale of the entire universe to complete large-scale personnel transportation, but the problem is that Asgard is no longer able to create a second Rainbow Bridge, and only the magic power of the Immortal Palace can drive it. For the Space Stone we have already controlled, it is only used as a planet-destroying weapon. If you want to use the Rainbow Bridge to solve the travel problem of the human empire, unless you move the entire Asgard to another Terra Earth you mentioned, then it is estimated that some problems can be temporarily solved, but once the Rainbow Bridge, which is a unique item, is destroyed by the enemy, we will have nothing. Moreover, since the physical laws between 2 different universes may not be completely the same, whether the Rainbow Bridge can really work is also a huge problem that needs to be verified. However, Mr. Reed and I have temporarily developed a prototype of a faster-than-light engine after combining a secret project of S.H.I.E.L.D. called Project Pegasus with part of the energy of the Space Stone. Although we have not even conducted the first effective test here, we believe that even if we cannot touch the essence of faster-than-light travel, short-term light speed travel within the star system should not be a problem. Of course, even if this faster-than-light travel technology becomes completely mature in the future, we still have a problem that we cannot avoid, that is, the Space Stone, which specializes in providing energy, must be firmly in our hands, otherwise, all spacecraft with similar engines installed will lose the basic ability to cross the faster-than-light boundary. At this moment, Doom's words made Primarch Roche temporarily fall into deep thought. Only a moment later, Primarch Roche turned his head and asked Doom, "Doom, are you interested in going to the Legion fleet with me to take a look? On the one hand, I want you to try whether the faster-than-light prototype can play a role there, and on the other hand, I also want you to see the real tragic battlefield. But at the same time, I must tell you in advance that the existence of the warp is extremely dangerous for someone like you who is good at witchcraft. The power of chaos may be tempting your mind and soul at all times. Although I can use various means to help you prevent it, I dare not say that I can guarantee your safety 100%. At this moment, Doom smiled slightly upon hearing Primarch Roche's words. He then said solemnly to the other party, "Primarch, you will never see a rainbow without experiencing wind and rain. To be honest, I have always been full of curiosity and fantasy about that world. It is a pleasure to be able to see it with my own eyes. In addition, I will back up my knowledge and the technology I have mastered, along with my self-awareness, several times using the consciousness storage device. If I unfortunately die there, then perhaps the cloning technology we have already mastered will recreate me. As for whether the clone has a soul or not, or whether it is me, only the Emperor will know. I also hope that she can bless my adventure. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. As time swiftly passed, the time for Primarch Roche and the others to return to the Primarch fleet was also approaching. Cypher Roche and Wolf Roche had successively returned to the Gemini Island base from the African region. Eric Killmonger, the civilian prince who had been imprisoned by Wakanda, was completely brainwashed and controlled, and temporarily appointed as the highest officer of the Wakanda mining area. If he doesn't make too many intolerable mistakes in the future, then he will most likely be gradually promoted to governor of the African theater, cooperating with the ship-borne machine spirit Cortana, who has become the central processing system, to manage all matters, large and small. As for another specialty of Wakanda, the heart-shaped herb, Cypher Roche also collected some mature varieties and handed them over to the biological sage, Teacher Connor, to see if they can be cultivated and manufactured on a large scale to increase the basic combat power of all Astartes. As for the problem of Cypher Rock's near loss of control not long ago, although Wolf Roche had concealed it for Cypher Roche still fully informed Primarch Roche of the matter. The other party also took the opportunity to casually mention the matter of the Eldar power lurking on Terra. After Primarch Roche had a headache for a while after hearing this, he decided not to pursue it for the time being. After all, if their unauthorized actions accidentally disturbed the terrifying existence that had been at peace for millions of years, the ultimate result of Terra suffering a huge crisis at the planetary or even cosmic level would be completely not worth the loss. In the following period of time, Cypher Roche and Wolf Roche began to load a large number of valuable materials that their storage methods could take away at the Gemini Island base, including, but not limited to, several squadrons of heavy vehicles and flying vehicles. The Gemini-type hover motorcycles that Redditus had just manufactured, enough power armor and bolters to arm an ordinary chapter, plasma guns, melta-bombs, and various melee weapons. Wolf Roche also took the opportunity to have Redditus design a set of speed-specialized vibranium power armor for him, greatly increasing his mobility and defense capabilities. Cypher Roche wanted to refuse, but couldn't resist Redditus's overly enthusiastic persuasion. In the end, he also changed into a set of vibranium power armor, but the specialized areas focused more on the arms, greatly enhancing his own attack reaction speed. Soon after, Cypher Roche and Wolf Roche, having completed everything, came to find Primarch Roche to say goodbye. According to Cypher Roche, their next task, in addition to first helping Wolf Roche plan to seize Huron Blackheart's Blackstone Fortress, the rest is that he himself needs to explore the true whereabouts of Lionel Johnson and awaken another Gene Sire as soon as possible. In this regard, Primarch Roche, who was also shouldering heavy responsibilities, could only give him his blessings and a strong embrace between brothers. And after the two clone brothers went to the Primarch fleet in advance, the time Primarch Roche could stay was not long either. Because according to the sacred number countdown displayed on the Chaos Sacrifice page, another Chaos blessing was about to come. And it would either be Slaanesh, or the even more troublesome Tzeentch. Therefore, Primarch Roche directly recalled the Astartes companies distributed in various war zones, leaving only some apothecaries to train new recruits, and the rest returned to the interior of the Primarch fleet in advance. Before returning to the Primarch fleet, he also made a special trip to Fenris alone, successfully bringing back the newly forged Primarch-class power armor, Starfire Glory. As for the Space Wolves company promised by Bjorn the Fell-Handed, it would be sent to the Primarch fleet in succession, with Terra as a transit station. Buzzing. Inside the upper ancient hall of the fleet flagship, battle barge, Megalodon, Carcharodon's chief librarian Kahulanchi and Blood Raven's mysterious mentor Orion are jointly displaying extremely powerful psychic powers, and the two of them are carefully guiding the continuous opening of a warp gate. And in the nearby positions, one by one, the fully armed Carcharodons and Blood Ravens are holding melee weapons and heavy firepower weapons, performing highly concentrated alert actions. It's no wonder everyone looks like they are facing a formidable enemy. Perhaps it was because the number of times the warp gate was opened and closed in a short period of time was too many, causing many strange warp creatures to find an exit to invade the real universe, launching one attack after another like desperados. Fortunately, it has not attracted the attention of more warp demons for the time being, otherwise the flagship will definitely be lively for a while. Dong dong dong. In an instant, Rorschach, who was becoming taller and stronger, stepped into the interior of the ancient hull wearing that set of golden starfire glory power armor. And behind the vibranium wings folded up by the other party, the dark green cloak covering the tall body was moving without wind with Doom's firm steps. Even Iron Man David, whose eye sockets were slightly flashing with blue light, came here shaking his pitch-black skeleton body. Doom was here to see the cruel battlefield of the Warhammer universe, and to test the true effectiveness of the FTL engine prototype by the way. Iron Man David came again to carry out certain planning and resource allocation for the Primarch fleet, which has an increasing number of crew members and ships, and to strive to establish a special mechanism that can adjust everything at any time. Orion, since you are here too, then I don't need to find you Blood Ravens separately. At this moment, Rorschach, who scanned around, saw the mysterious mentor Orion of the Blood Ravens company at a glance. He then nodded to the other party. Waving his vibranium palm, he extracted boxes of sealed special equipment from the resource page. This is a single soldier energy shield made of primitive vibranium and vibranium technology, which can greatly reduce the casualty rate of the Astartes. The other large companies were distributed when they returned, but because your Blood Ravens main force did not go to the native planet to fight, so I personally brought it back to you. We are very grateful to Lord Primarch for his great care for the Blood Ravens. I also said that every large company that came back before was mysterious, and it turns out that the root cause lies in this. The Blood Ravens' little ones like to exchange some unwanted things casually, but it's not enough to be so defensive against us, right? The mysterious mentor Orion, who quickly drove the power armor and bowed to the Primarch, complained with a puzzled tone. Moreover, I also heard that the number of casualties of the other large companies who went to the native planet to fight this time was also relatively heavy. Lord Primarch, next time a similar war occurs, why not let our Blood Ravens go? We, who are proficient in psychic prophecy, may be able to reduce some completely unnecessary losses. Rorschach, hearing Orion's words, slightly raised his eyebrows. He nodded with a calm expression and said, "There's nothing impossible about that either. Anyway, don't let your company commander Gabriel come to me crying at that time. Let me introduce you, this is a mortal-friendly army from the native planet, Doom. I hope you can get along more friendly in the next period of time. Orion, Kahulanchi, you two, as psychic masters proficient in this way, can communicate with each other more. However, there is one thing I want to make clear. If all of you think that Doom is just a mortal and underestimate him, then don't come to me to complain when you suffer setbacks, because ordinary Astartes need at least the number of a combat squad to completely suppress him." In fact, what Lorger said wasn't entirely to give Doom, who had just arrived, a chance to save face. Rather, Doom, who had only recently come into contact with psychic powers, quickly displayed an extremely powerful psychic talent. Before coming here, when he was engaging in simulated battles with the Astartes on the home planet, he was already fully capable of using his psychic powers, approaching the level of a mature librarian, to display various flashy psychic techniques. However, according to a series of tests, Doom's psychic talent was more inclined towards the biokinetics and telekinetic branches, rather than the more common pyromantic and precognitive branches. To ensure safety, Lorger even extracted a large amount of Emperor's blood from his own body again, allowing Doom to keep it with him at all times. Even the power armor, which had been replaced with a vibranium armor shell, was densely covered with countless Emperor's prayer scriptures. Almost every metal component had been re-chanted by the priests of the Adeptus Ministorum for a long time, specifically to prevent the continuous chaos incursion. Soon after a brief discussion, the group set off for the bridge of the flagship. And Iron Man David immediately began coordinating with Captain Tiberius, who had come to welcome the Primarch. Together, they began the tedious task of sorting through the resources inside the hundreds of ships, large and small, of the entire fleet. At the same time, having arrived at the bridge, Lorgar also learned from Blood Raven Captain Gabriel about the many situations encountered by the Primarch's fleet after a large number of Astartes were transferred back to the home planet. First, the specific war situation on the dark side of the Imperium. Almost all forces belonging to the Imperium were slowly falling into a difficult situation of being surrounded and divided by aliens and chaos. In addition, the unpredictable and continuously appearing warp storms or space wormholes between many sectors and systems made it difficult for even the Primarch's fleet to dispatch support forces in time. Sometimes, even the cross-sector intelligence network that the Raven Guard Company had been working hard to manage was becoming less and less able to transmit useful intelligence quickly and successfully. This undoubtedly greatly increased the difficulty of the Primarch's fleet's patrol and support missions. Especially recently, the Primarch's fleet, while navigating, either encountered increasingly active small fleets of orc greenskins, or encountered Tyrannid Hive fleet splinter fleets drifting rapidly in real space just after warp jumping out of the warp. Fortunately, these alien enemies had fewer ships, and the Primarch's fleet had an overly large number of ships, so it had not suffered any irreparable losses. In response, Lorgar, as the Primarch, first thanked Blood Raven Captain Gabriel and the Blood Raven neophytes for their hard work. Then, he quickly began to consider the next course of action. The initial patrol destination of the Primarch's fleet would not change. It was still Ultramar, the 500 worlds of the Ultima Segmentum. But now it seemed that the duration of this patrol might continuously increase due to the delay caused by numerous battles. However, the Legion, having just experienced a large number of Astartes losses and attrition, had not yet filled the missing strength. The creation time for the latest batch of Astartes recruits was still quite long, and Lorgar was also trying to find a way to use the completely different time flow between the two universes to compensate for this. Soon after, the group that had returned to the Primarch's fleet began to relaunch one support mission after another in response to psychic distress signals, according to the previous battle plan. And Doom, who had just joined the Legion, quickly gained the respect of countless Astartes in all the companies with his considerable battlefield command ability and increasingly terrifying psychic powers. And Doom, whose combat will and mentality had been repeatedly tempered, also truly understood why Lorgar would choose to stay with the fleet for a long time. Compared to the intensity of the war here, even the several chaos wars experienced on the home planet only had a slightly higher number of casualties and sacrifices. But now, on every human planet that issued a psychic distress call, similar levels of death and sacrifice were occurring almost every moment. However, just as Lorgar was planning to carry out more prayer and support missions, on the one hand, to buy some time for the dark side of the Imperium, and on the other hand, to see if he could salvage some Astartes chapters intact, and try to increase the Legion's manpower. Woo! Just then, an extremely shrill ship intrusion alarm suddenly resounded in Lorgar's ears. His brow furrowed slightly. His tall body, clad in vibranium power armor, jumped off the metal throne without hesitation, and rushed out of the interior of the private palace with a terrifying whistling sound. Dong dong dong. The next second, Lorgar, who had stepped outside, was greeted by dozens of Terminator armored guards quickly appearing at the end of the corridor. He had just joined up with the Terminator Guard, when he once again heard Tiberius's deep voice in his ear. Primarch, lower decks. Lorgar, his expression indifferent, pulled the blood-soaked scythe, surrounded by green light, from the storage interface. He quickly led a large group of Terminator guards towards the lower decks of the flagship. However, when Lorgar successfully arrived at the intended location, he immediately saw that familiar figure standing motionless in place, holding the empathic obliterator staff in his arms, his entire silver metal body motionless. At the same time, that metal skull head, with green ghostly light emanating from within its eye sockets, highlighting a somewhat sly and rat-like overall temperament, was being firmly locked within the firing range by hundreds of Astartes using various heavy weapons. Long time no see, my most esteemed human Primarch. Could you please ask these Astartes younglings of yours to stay away from me for a while? I've already said that I'm the alien consultant you personally invited, but they don't seem to believe it. At this moment, the mechanical voice from the soulless King Trazyn the Infinite slowly echoed in the surrounding cold, damp air. Trazyn, what are you doing on my ship? Also, couldn't you have contacted me in advance? I think even a mere shipboard communication system probably couldn't stop your little tricks, right? At this moment, Lorgar, who subconsciously took a deep breath, stepped forward with the blood scythe in his hand, his expression unkind. Dozens of Terminator guards quickly formed defensive formations not far behind him, and as a large number of azure blue single-soldier energy shields were continuously deployed, they were also fully prepared to launch a defensive counterattack against the soulless King Trazyn the Infinite. Ha ha ha. And hearing Lorgar's words, the soulless King Trazyn the Infinite slowly let out a low mechanical laugh. It spread out its hands, its gaze fixed on Lorgar, who was gradually approaching, and said, "How can there be a bad guy who is an alien consultant but doesn't follow his employer? I really don't have any malice in coming here, I'm completely here to fulfill the agreement between you and me. You should know that being able to barely catch a glimpse of your whereabouts at this time is a very difficult thing for me." At this moment, as the distance between the two gradually decreased, Lorgar, whose tall stature was much taller than the soulless King Trazyn the Infinite's living metal surrogate, lowered his head and looked down at the other party. Then, with an expressionless face, he raised a vibranium palm, slowly telling the highly vigilant Astartes around him to lower the heavy firepower weapons in their palms. "Trazyn, I'll take your word for it for now, and you better be like what you said, or else my fleet doesn't welcome an uninvited Necron overlord like you." Inside the Primarch's private palace, the silver skull head turned back and forth a few times, and Trazyn the Infinite, scrutinizing everything new around him, stood at the very bottom of the metal throne. He casually took out a tesseract labyrinth from inside his metal body. Then, from within the tesseract labyrinth, he conjured a set of cold metal chairs and a desk with a distinct Necron aesthetic. However, at this moment, Reboute, sitting on the metal throne, had to temporarily put aside the matters he was currently dealing with. He frowned slightly and looked down at Trazyn the Infinite below, asking in a low voice, "Trazyn, what are you doing again? Oh, esteemed human Primarch, didn't you say that I shouldn't leave your sight for even a moment? I plan to build a temporary office space here. If your Astartes encounter Xenos races they've never seen before, or ones that are incredibly troublesome, they can come to me for questions and solutions. It's not boasting, but I can say that the number of Xenos I haven't seen in the entire galaxy is very few." Trazyn the Infinite said to Reboute without even looking up. He even took out a set of golden seals and corresponding stationery, the kind only possessed by the High Lords of Terra, from the Tesseract Labyrinth and placed them one by one on the desk. Reboute, his facial expression unchanged, pretended not to see those undoubtedly genuine items. He took a deep breath and said slowly to the other party, "I don't think you're here just to fulfill a past agreement, Trazyn. It's just the two of us here, can you tell me the truth?" At this moment, hearing Reboute's words, Trazyn temporarily stopped taking out the trinkets that belonged to his personal collecting hobby. He turned his silver skull head, his deep, green gaze fixed on the Primarch high above, and said, "Very well, I'll be frank then. I'm here for the Infinity Stones you mentioned. I need to produce a truly meaningful data research report to completely convince an old friend of mine to stand on our side in most matters. Just like your crumbling Imperium of Man, the Necron dynasties are also divided into countless factions. I'm just the most insignificant Necron trickster among them. Moreover, due to my personal hobbies, my interpersonal relationships aren't very good. Therefore, I need to use the strong network of the Necron Seer, the Astromancer Orican, to indirectly mobilize more power. So, whether it's for the current Imperium of Man or for you personally, this is undoubtedly a good thing. When my plan is truly completed, Most of the Necrons will definitely reduce their invasions and harassment of Imperial worlds, and may even actively help your Imperium in some matters. Of course, I'm referring to those tomb world rulers with sane minds. Flayed ones and other Necron madmen are not included. At this moment, the words from Trazyn the Infinite made Rabute narrow his eyes. He paused in silence for a moment, then raised a hand of vibranium from the neck position of his power armor and picked up the Mind Stone that had been slowly wriggled out by countless living metals. The next second, Rabute threw the Mind Stone in his vibranium hand towards Trazyn sitting below without any hesitation. Lacking a more suitable cosmic environment and corresponding activation methods, a mere infinity stone was just a seemingly beautiful gem crystal. Ah, I just love the decisive style of the Primarch. Without any hesitation or procrastination, this is indeed a mysterious creation that surpasses the imagination of any life, and it makes me even more fantasize about what a fascinating and great universe it is. At this moment, Trazyn the Infinite, who quickly reached out and pinched the Mind Stone, said slowly in a very intoxicated tone. His deep gaze almost incessantly scanned back and forth across the Mind Stone, which emitted a faint light. Esteemed human Primarch, how many Infinity Stones have you currently mastered in that universe? After Trazyn worked hard to observe for a while, he suddenly looked up and asked Rabute on the metal throne. Rabute, narrowing his eyes, did not hide anything. He said unhurriedly, "The Mind Stone is in my hands, the Space Stone remains on native Terra as a basic guarantee, and another Time Stone, although nominally it doesn't belong to me, can also be indirectly controlled by me. Currently, I'm still missing the Reality Stone, the Power Stone, and the Soul Stone, which is said to be the most difficult to obtain. So, there are still 3 missing." Trazyn the Infinite slightly shook his silver skull head. The green light in his deep eye sockets flickered a few times, and he once again said, "Esteemed human Primarch, I do have a small suggestion. If, in your opinion, the other Infinity Stones are more difficult to obtain, why not let our Necrons go to that universe? I think with our various methods, we can definitely help you retrieve them easily." However, at this moment, Trazyn's words were not completely finished. He was forcibly interrupted by Rabute, who suddenly sneered. He said in a low voice, "After going around in a big circle, you were waiting for me here. Trazyn, I can let you play with the Infinity Stones here at will, but that doesn't mean I'll allow it in another place. You should also understand how precious something like this, which is a conceptual embodiment of the universe, is, right? Do you think I would allow a Xenos to control a powerful artifact that could threaten native Terra and countless humans? Just like those star god shards that your Necrons have in your hands, would you let me use them at will? Not to mention that the difficulty of using the Infinity Stones is far easier than controlling a star god. So, don't even think about realizing your little plan." At this moment, as soon as Rabute's voice fell, buzz buzz buzz, along with a buzzing sound that resonated throughout the palace. One by one, metal 10 rings filled with purple light suddenly flew out from one of his vibranium arms. And in the blink of an eye, they collided with the edge of Trazyn's metal hand that had been holding the Mind Stone. Ding ding ding. After only a few breaths, through the extremely ingenious back and forth collisions and constant flight between the metal 10 rings, the Mind Stone, which had been repeatedly bouncing in midair, instantly returned to Rabute's vibranium hand. Esteemed human Primarch, I fully understand the vigilance of you humans towards Xenos races, but in my opinion, everything is negotiable. At this moment, Trazyn the Infinite, who had been forcibly taken back the Mind Stone, did not show any dissatisfaction. He slightly shook his metal hand, which had been somewhat damaged by the living metal, and tentatively said in a calm tone, "I am willing to give you the Gene Sire's clone and a portion of the Astartes, just to exchange for a chance for me to go to that universe. What do you think of the terms of this deal? Sounds good, but I refuse." The Primarch sitting on the metal throne replied without moving. To some extent, even if the mere Necron overlord Trazyn were to go to the homeworld, Rogel Dorn would still have ways to deal with him. Even the Mind Stone, which could unleash its powerful force again, could give the opponent an unforgettable lesson. Not to mention Magneto, who innately and firmly restrains all metal substances, is also on Terra. However, he didn't want Trazyn the Infinite to obtain permission to set foot on the homeworld so easily. At least, before completely squeezing out the other party's value and foundation, Trazyn shouldn't even think about achieving any of his goals. However, in the following period, Trazyn, who was directly rejected by the Primarch, seemed to completely embrace the perspective of an alien advisor. He began to enthusiastically help the Astartes deal with the encountered Orc and Tyrannid, and also provided the fleet with a large number of brand new Necron weapons for free. Even after accidentally learning that Doom was a native of the homeworld, he secretly wanted to become a good friend who could talk about everything with the other party. And after Doom learned something from Rogel Dorn, he also quickly played the corresponding role, trying to extract basic technology about the Necron race from Trazyn the Infinite. In Rogel Dorn's view, both sides could be said to be well aware of each other's ulterior motives. During this period, Trazyn, who temporarily obtained the right to walk freely, also officially met with Iron Man David, who was busy with affairs. This also made Trazyn once again sigh at Rogel Dorn's audacity, daring to keep a mechanical monster like Iron Man by his side in broad daylight. Soon after, Rogel Dorn, who had completed all preparations, began to lead the Terminator Guard to carry out the prayer support mission. Rogel Dorn didn't hide it from Trazyn either, because the other party also knew that he, the Primarch, possessed the special ability to descend everywhere. And after Rogel Dorn successfully completed a prayer support mission, Trazyn the Infinite, who was somewhat eager to try, also proposed to Rogel Dorn. He wanted to follow the Primarch for a prayer support mission to see if he could obtain some new collectibles. For this reason, he could even give out a batch of gene seed stolen from the human empire. Rogel Dorn did not immediately agree. Instead, he proposed to Trazyn the Infinite the request to release the clone Fulgrim. However, Trazyn also insisted that if he wanted to release the clone, he would need to personally go to the homeworld, otherwise, everything would be out of the question. In the end, the two sides broke up unhappily, but also reached some consensus for the next prayer support mission. Buzzing. As an warp gate suddenly appeared. Each fully armed Terminator Guard quickly propped up a vibranium energy shield large enough to cover their tall bodies. They skillfully carried storm bolters and rushed into the unfamiliar area outside the gate. Dong dong dong. The next second, Rogel Dorn, wearing vibranium power armor on his huge body, Trazyn the Infinite, holding the empathic obliterator, and Doom, whose dark green cloak danced in the wind, also slowly stepped into this place. When each magnetic boot was deeply embedded in the damp ground below, crushing countless lush shrubs and plants. Rogel Dorn, who glanced around a few times, immediately waved his vibranium palm, allowing a part of the Terminator Guard to launch an exploration operation on their own. The air humidity is close to 60%, the temperature is constant at about 39 degrees, and countless shrubs and dense forests are all over the field of vision. Could it be that we have come to a garden world this time? At this moment, Doom, who had slightly used his psychic detection, turned his head and said to Rogel Dorn. Before Rogel Dorn could speak, Trazyn the Infinite shook his silver skull head and said with emotion. If you ask me, as long as it's not the dangerous forests of Catachan, that's fine. I went there to explore once, and one of my clones didn't even react before it was completely swallowed by something. As soon as Trazyn finished speaking, Rogel Dorn, who quickly waved his vibranium palm, immediately stopped the other party's intention to continue speaking. Because at this time, everyone saw that several Terminator Guard members who had just dispersed had returned. One of the Terminators was also holding a strong figure who was struggling desperately in his metal hand. Primitive Barbarian. Rogel Dorn, frowning slightly, quickly drove the vibranium power armor and stepped forward. He lowered his head slightly and looked down at the barbaric human, whose skin was covered with various colorful oil paints, but who didn't wear much clothing to cover himself. Lord Primarch, when we found him, he was setting traps to capture prey in the forest. He may not even have mastered the basic Imperial language, so it is impossible to have more effective communication. At this moment, the Terminator, who was holding the barbaric human in his palm, said to Rogel Dorn in a muffled voice. After Rogel Dorn nodded slightly, he immediately beckoned to Doom, who was standing not far away, and said in a deep voice, "Doom, try to invade the other party's mind. Try to be as gentle as possible and don't kill him." As soon as Rogel Dorn finished speaking, Doom, driving the power armor and stepping forward, gently placed a ceramic steel palm on the head of this barbaric human, whose expression remained ferocious and who seemed to have no concept of fear. Hoo-hoo. The next second, the barbaric human, whose eyes suddenly turned white and who foamed at the mouth, quickly fainted. Doom, who took a deep breath, also vaguely extracted a lot of useful things from the other party's fragmented memories. Lord Primarch, although the other party looks like a member of a primitive tribe, through some vague memory images, I believe that this hot planet is very likely to be a recruiting world for an Astartes chapter. Because the other party's memory has deep impressions of metal giants wearing armor, roaring flying birds, and other special things. Oh, that would be easy. Let the Terminator Guard temporarily contact this Astartes chapter and let them send flying vehicles to pick us up directly. Of course, for safety, we need to find a safe area that is sufficient to defend against attacks to prevent being surrounded by some malicious guys. As soon as he finished speaking, with the issuance of Rogel Dorn's order, everyone standing around also quickly launched a continuous advance into the depths of this lush tropical forest. Doom, who flew directly into the air, pointed out a direction for everyone, and finally found a complex terrain that could avoid firepower bombardment. Subsequently, the Terminator Guard, distributed in a defensive formation, began to quickly contact this unknown Astartes chapter through a large number of communication channels. Before long, the roar of the vector engines from a number of Thunderhawk transport aircraft continued to resound in everyone's ears. Buzz buzz buzz. As a Thunderhawk transport, its engines roaring, its massive silver body crushing the surrounding rainforest trees as it forcibly descended. Several towering figures clad in steel-colored power armor, their silver helmets gleaming, and silver skulls hanging from their waists, quickly stepped out of the hatch, their magnetic boots sinking into the soft, damp rainforest floor. At the same time, Rourke, whose allegiance was indistinguishable to the naked eye, immediately activated his vibranium power armor and slowly emerged from his hiding place of rocks and vines, completely exposing his massive frame, far exceeding that of ordinary Astartes, to the scanning lenses of the oncoming party. Of course, the dozens of Terminator Guards hidden behind the dense rainforest and tropical plants remained concealed. They subconsciously raised the storm bolters in their gauntlets, ready to open fire on these Astartes of unknown allegiance. Huh, are you, a Primarch? By Ultramar, I am Chief Librarian Vashiro of the Silver Skulls chapter, I salute you, Primarch. At that moment, an Astartes with quick reflexes paused momentarily, then hastily removed his silver helmet. His resolute face, covered in tribal-style tattoos, clearly showed great surprise. The next second, Librarian Vashiro, the silver skulls on his waist clattering, quickly stepped forward. Without hesitation, he knelt on one knee in the direction of the Primarch. Silver Skulls. So this is your homeworld. Rise, brothers. Hearing the other party's words, Rourke, slightly raising an eyebrow, immediately understood. He had encountered the Silver Skulls chapter during a request for aid long ago, when Rourke led his forces to rescue the Lamenters chapter. A company of the Silver Skulls chapter also participated in the Kosteln expedition led by Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines. Although the two sides had never formally communicated, the Silver Skulls, a successor chapter of the Ultramarines, were certainly fully aware of the existence and identity of Rourke, the lost Primarch. Thump thump thump. Dozens of seconds later, as everyone's vigilance lessened, and as Rourke rapidly waved his vibranium hand towards the surrounding rainforest. One by one, the Terminator Guard members ambushing the perimeter of the Thunderhawk landing zone swiftly revealed their tall and imposing figures. Librarian Vashiro, rising from the ground, exchanged a look with several battle brothers of the Silver Skulls. They chuckled wryly and directed the several Thunderhawk transports circling overhead to find a wider area of the rainforest to land. However, at this moment, just as everything was proceeding as planned, Librarian Vashiro, stepping forward unintentionally, immediately spotted the Necron Overlord hidden deep within the Primarch's Terminator Guard. Aha! At this moment, the expressions of the Silver Skull's Astartes, originally filled with joy, instantly changed as Librarian Vashiro suddenly emitted a strange cry from deep within his throat. They all drew their melee weapons and bolters, intending to completely eliminate this Necron alien. However, the more rapid response of the Terminator Guard and Rourke's reprimand prevented the Silver Skulls, who had almost lost their minds, from immediately launching an attack. Seeing the atmosphere between the two sides gradually stiffening, Librarian Vashiro, frowning, had no choice but to step forward and offer some explanation to the indifferent Primarch. A long time ago, the Silver Skulls chapter had suffered a sudden attack launched by a Necron named Orikan the Diviner. The latter claimed that in order to ensure the accuracy of his prophecies, he had to inflict irreparable damage on the Silver Skulls chapter, who were trying to save a human planet. Since then, the Silver Skulls chapter had held no goodwill towards the Necron alien race, and would destroy these skeletal frames even at the cost of several times their own casualties. This was why they had reacted so excitedly after seeing a Necron Overlord. Now, they could temporarily refrain from attacking Trazyn out of respect for the Primarch. However, Librarian Vashiro made no secret of his hope that the other party would be more careful. After all, even the Primarch could be negligent, and the homeworld, covered in terrifying rainforests, was perfectly suited to bury a Necron Overlord. At this moment, through the verbal exchanges between Librarian Vashiro and Primarch Rourke, the crowd, who had almost erupted into conflict, gradually calmed down. Trazyn, slightly shaking his silver metal skull head, did not show the slightest fear. Perhaps in order to alleviate the Silver Skull's prejudice and hatred towards the Necrons. He even recounted an amusing incident that he had experienced as the group walked towards the Thunderhawk transports. About several millennia ago, he personally led a large group of Necron warriors to fight against the rampaging orcs on the world of Nocturne. And after that short war ended, the local human populace mistook him for a librarian of the Silver Skulls chapter. They even erected a symbolic commemorative statue for the Necron. Of course, the overall shape of the Astartes commemorative statue, being too slender and thin, was truly amusing and even more likely to attract the scrutiny and thunderous actions of the Inquisition. So after learning of this, Trazyn once again tricked and coaxed the commemorative statue away, which could be considered as saving the local human populace from an undeserved disaster. So, Trazyn, what are you trying to express? The incurable ignorance of the human populace? Or the cold and ruthless warlord style of the Inquisition? At this moment, Rourke, sitting inside the Thunderhawk transport cabin, stared at Trazyn opposite him and asked indifferently. Venerable Primarch, I am not mocking anything, on the contrary, I have always considered this to be one of the best items in my collection. After all, it is always a matter of pride to have one's self regarded as a guardian spirit or a living saint by some culture. Hearing the Primarch's words, Trazyn rotated the empathic obliterator in his gauntlet. Even the depths of that silver skull head faintly emitted an extremely low chuckle. Perhaps this is what makes me different from other Necrons. I respect life to some extent, even if the other party is an alien race completely different from me. Speaking of which, there are quite a few humans who specialize in serving me. Their living standards are far above those of the ordinary people of the Imperium, at least they can live to a ripe old age. Trazyn, you can shut your mouth now. Your Necron race has contributed a lot to the current state of the entire galaxy, don't make me expose your scars in person. At this moment, Rourke, slowly closing his eyes, said in a low voice. Trazyn, somewhat having talked too much, scanned the surrounding Terminator Guard several times before temporarily falling into silence. Only occasionally, in the gaps between the roaring of the displacement engines, a soft humming of songs from Nocturne could be faintly heard inside the dimly lit cabin. The Silver Skulls chapter's homeworld is named Savia. It is a rainforest planet perpetually shrouded in tropical heat. The vast rainforest depths are home to numerous barbarian tribes. It can be said that almost every Silver Skull hails from a local primitive tribal clan. To maintain the fighting ability and survival instincts of all barbarian tribes, the Silver Skulls chapter only appears before tribal chiefs when recruiting new soldiers or when necessary. Otherwise, they avoid too much contact with any barbarian tribes. Buzzing. As a squadron of Thunderhawk transports, their engines emitting a low rumble, swiftly traversed most of the planet's lush rainforests. Abundant warm rainwater from the rainy season repeatedly washed over the silver gleaming metal hulls, producing increasingly dense, subtle sounds. Soon after, everyone looked out through the portholes of the Thunderhawk transports. A large fortress monastery, entirely erected within a rainforest valley, was faintly revealed beneath the cover of countless vines and rainforest trees. After all, the Thunderhawk transports slowly landed on the landing platform. Roach and the others, led by him, arrived at the Silver Skulls chapter's fortress monastery for the first time. According to librarian Shivalo, who accompanied them, most of the chapter's personnel are currently supporting the imperial world of Aragon 7, which is under attack by an unidentified demon warband. So, apart from a large number of mortal servants and servitors, only a few dozen Astartes remain inside the monastery as the last line of defense. Even more unexpectedly for Roach and the others. Although the Silver Skulls chapter likes to collect the skulls of their enemies after battle, choosing to silver plate them for collection. But judging solely from their interactions with mortal servants, the relationship between them is maintained with great equality, which is rare even among the Ultramarines' successor chapters. Roach and the others, silently observing everything, also speculated. This may be related to the fact that the Silver Skulls Astartes all come from barbarian tribes. Therefore, the young barbarian who had awakened from his coma was also thrown to the mortal servants by doom. Before long, all the remaining Astartes came to pay their respects to the Primarch. After everyone experienced a baptism of local primitive cuisine together, Roach also ordered everyone to temporarily enter a state of rest. Currently, no signs of danger have been detected on the entire planet. The Silver Skulls, whose combat style is more adept at siege warfare and prophecy, have also fully utilized their expertise. The entire homeworld has been thoroughly built into an iron fortress hidden beneath layers of rainforest. Numerous weapon platforms and metal bunkers are hidden in every concealed area of the rainforest. They can be remotely controlled at any time via internal servitors or cogitator arrays that are still dormant. If necessary, even countless barbarian tribes will respond to the Silver Skull's call to launch ambushes and counterattacks against invading enemies. Of course, if there was anything that even Roach, as a Primarch, found difficult to adapt to, that would be the torrential rainy season on Savia, which can last for half a year or even 8 months. He really found it hard to imagine how a large number of barbarian tribes survived in such an extremely terrifying environment. The Silver Skull's chief librarian, Vashiro, answered that one should never underestimate the resilience of the human race, and every life finds its own way. According to Roach's idea, a portion of the Silver Skull's Astartes needed to be taken away by him. After all, now that he was here, he couldn't go back empty-handed. Moreover, the Primarch's fleet, which had not yet completed its replenishment plan, needed more manpower, and the Silver Skulls also expressed their willingness to follow the Primarch into battle. However, even though Librarian Vashiro had notified the Silver Skulls chapter master Argentius of the Primarch's arrival on their homeworld, the other party's entire fleet showed no signs of returning. Soon after, Librarian Vashiro, who had just performed several Emperor's tarot divinations, found Primarch Roach with a solemn expression. "Primarch, if my prophetic abilities are not mistaken, our homeworld may be attacked by a fierce demon warband." At this moment, Roach, who was somewhat helpless from being tormented by the constant warm rainwater in the local sky, seemed to instantly find motivation. He abruptly activated his vibranium power armor and rose from the edge of the fortress monastery's window, his eyes fixed on the other party as he said in a deep voice, "Where are the traitors? How many are coming? Have they already landed? If the enemy's fleet approaches the planet's orbit, I'll take people to board them. Primarch, I only foresaw the traitors' movements, they haven't arrived here yet. Librarian Vashiro, whose stern face was covered in tribal tattoos, quickly said with a hint of embarrassment. I suspect it's a demon warband called the Soul Maw, because centuries ago, during a purification operation, we Silver Skulls beheaded their warband's champion, and they've held a grudge against us ever since. At this moment, Roach took a deep breath after listening to Librarian Vashiro's words. He slightly soothed the somewhat inexplicably restless desire for slaughter in the depths of his heart and said, although psychic predictions may not be completely accurate, where I descend is bound to have something happen. Vashiro, mobilize all your manpower, increase the search range and density of the augury arrays on the orbital defense platforms, and constantly monitor the movement of warp entry and exit points throughout the system. In addition, notify the local barbarian tribes that if they accidentally discover any unusual traces, or encounter major casualties, they should notify us immediately. Roach's sonorous and powerful voice echoed in Librarian Shivalo's ears. After the other party nodded with a solemn expression, he immediately activated his power armor and turned to leave the room. Roach, who stood in place and pondered for a moment, also activated his vibranium power armor and went to find the Terminator squad and Doom and the others. As for Trazyn, who was displaying miracles to some barbarian tribal chiefs on Savia, after learning of the impending demon warband invasion, he casually released a fully formed Necron force from a Tesseract labyrinth, preparing to lead his subordinates to capture more Chaos Astartes as collectibles. After all, having played the role of a good Xenos next to a human Primarch for so long, he also needed to satisfy his own little desires. As time went on, Librarian Vashiro's invasion prediction was indeed gradually being verified. First, there were violent fluctuations from warp entry and exit points within the Savia system. Then, a small barbarian tribe located at the planet's polar region was completely slaughtered by several metal giants said to be clad in blood-red power armor. When Doom and the others, as the vanguard, arrived at the scene aboard a Thunderhawk transport, they discovered that almost every corpse of the local barbarians was missing its head. According to the Silver Skulls chapter's understanding of the Soul Maw warband, they had never had similar headhunting customs. In other words, either they had developed some bad habits in recent years, or there was more than one Chaos warband invading this place. Dong, dong, dong. With a grave expression, Librarian Vahiro, clad in power armor, strode past one mangled corpse after another, each missing its head. As the power staff in his palm trembled slightly, his entire being began to emit visible psychic waves. The Silver Skull's librarian's more adept precognitive psychic powers gradually came into play. In the next second, Librarian Vahiro, whose eyes were closed, saw numerous future visions, and quickly found a path leading the others to victory amidst the countless chaotic scenes. I see 88 Chaos Astartes clad in blood-red power armor lurking in the depths of the rainforest 80 kilometers away. Based on their previous behavior patterns, they appear to be a group of Chaos traitors from the World Eaters. It seems the damned soul drinkers have found many helpers. Librarian Vahiro abruptly opened his eyes and said in a deep voice to the surrounding people. As soon as his words fell, the Silver Skulls who were standing around, as well as some Terminator Guard members led by Doom, immediately activated their power armor and turned to run towards the landing site of the Thunderhawk transport. Rumble, rumble. Just then, a barrage of roaring cannon fire from the gloomy sky above covered the surroundings almost instantly, completely blasting the Thunderhawk transports into a sky full of flying metal wreckage. Enemy attack. This is a trap, an ambush against us. At this moment, Librarian Vahiro, who was quickly erecting a psychic shield, saw other precognitive scenarios appear before his eyes once again. Realizing this, he roared loudly to the surrounding people without hesitation. At the same time, Doom, his dark green cloak billowing in the wind, rose into the air from the ground, enveloped in extremely powerful psychic fluctuations. He gently waved one of his ceramite gauntleted hands a few times. Streams of psychic witchcraft, enough to amplify strength and speed, quickly scattered onto the tall bodies of the 30-odd Astartes below. Dong, dong, dong. With the sound of heavy footsteps moving forward. 5 flesh-twisted figures, with black cannons sprouting from the front of their power armor and even from their spines, appeared. Under the cover of chaos, Astartes wielding heavy firepower weapons. They quickly stepped through the surrounding sultry and humid rainforest, and surrounded the Astartes, who were forming a defensive formation. Chaos Obliterators. And a group of traitors from the Iron Warriors. At this moment, Librarian Vahiro immediately recognized the living artillery pieces contaminated by the chaos virus, as well as the many tall figures of the Iron Warriors warband. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, countless bolter rounds and plasma beams erupted between the enemy and friendly forces. Although this group of Iron Warriors warband, who had set up an ambush trap, possessed several chaos obliterators that served as living artillery. They themselves also carried a large number of heavy firepower weapons. However, the Terminator Guard, who quickly raised their adamantium energy shields, shielded the battle brothers of the Silver Skulls. Together, they launched a swift close-quarters charge towards the Chaos Astartes in front of them. Crackle. Immediately afterwards, even more terrifying bolts of psychic lightning were continuously released from Doom's hands, flying in midair, swiftly eliminating many chaos traitors who did not have time to dodge. Chief among brothers. For the Primarch. For the homeworld. In the next moment, the Silver Skulls Astartes, wielding melee weapons with all their might, leapt out from beside the Terminator Guard, who were holding up their adamantium energy shields. Their tall bodies were enveloped in an unstoppable barbaric aura, crashing heavily into the interior of the Iron Warriors' combat squads. Da, da, da. Countless warm raindrops fell from the sky, pouring down on Trazyn's silver skull head like an open showerhead, as he violently waved the empathic obliterator staff forward. Necron warriors, each wielding a Gauss flare and a phase sword, launched an attack on the Chaos Warband in front of them with extremely uniform steps, braving the ceaseless wind and rain. Chi, chi, chi. A large number of extremely terrifying green beams erupted in the humid air, annihilating countless raindrops, while also turning one roaring world eater after another into particles of dissipated green atoms ascending into the sky. However, at this time, it seemed that the number of Chaos Astartes casualties filled Trazyn with regret. It began to order the Necron warriors to cease their ranged attacks, and instead engage in more intense melee combat with the Chaos Astartes, wielding their phase swords. Immediately afterwards, the Necron Overlord, holding the empathic obliterator staff, slowly stepped into the interior of the battlefield as if strolling. Each time he raised his metal palm and pointed remotely, an even greater number of Necron warriors would swarm up from behind him, completely imprisoning one Chaos Astartes after another, who were trying to resist with all their might, in place like metal ants. Even if some Chaos Astartes, repeatedly roaring furiously, broke through the solid defense line formed by countless Necron warriors by virtue of their powerful combat strength. Trazyn, whose eye sockets glowed with a faint green light, would also use the empathic obliterator staff in his palm to heavily bombard the opponent to the ground. Before long, on the entire battlefield, apart from those unlucky ones who were completely killed by the Gauss flares and phase swords, almost all of the Chaos Astartes were constantly collected by Trazyn into the stasis field, becoming another one of his collectibles. Outside the Silver Skull's large monastery fortress, heavy vehicles from the Chaos Warband were erupting with fierce cannon fire. At the same time, the metal treads were slowly crushing countless rainforest trees, launching a forward advancing action. Above the almost indestructible monastery walls, a large number of defensive firepower platforms had been quickly activated, launching continuous and incessant firepower bombardments towards the outside of the walls. At the same time, Chaos Astartes from the Soul Drinkers Warband were scattered around the entire monastery fortress walls, seemingly intending to launch a siege battle, completely resolving the Silver Skulls chapter. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just then, along with the brilliant flames from the propulsion device. And the white mist formed by a large amount of warm rainwater being evaporated. A huge figure wearing adamantium power armor fell from the top of the Silver Skull's monastery building like a golden meteor. The blood scythe and Dawnbreaker Warhammer, tightly gripped in his palms, almost instantly danced. And a large number of Chaos Astartes were slightly stunned for a moment. They also quickly launched terrifying charges, one after another, towards the huge figure that had just landed. Dong, dong, dong. Rokaz's magnetic boots rapidly took several steps. He used quickly cast shadow steps to dodge a series of plasma beams and melta beams that were focused on him. The Dawnbreaker Warhammer, suddenly swung by him, immediately carried with it a terrifying whistling sound. It completely smashed over a dozen Chaos Astartes, who didn't have time to dodge, along with the entire upper half of their power armor, into a shower of flesh and blood. Chi, chi, chi. Rokaz's other palm forcefully swept outwards with the blood scythe. The sharp blade, wreathed in green light, instantly cut a large row of charging Chaos Astartes in half, the dozens of severed flesh and blood bodies falling into the depths of the turbid, blood-soaked rain. Rumble. Just then, several heavy vehicles from the Chaos side seemed to seize a slight opening left during Rokaz's attack. As several pitch-black, massive gun barrels rotated, shells that suddenly tore through the air firmly locked onto Rokaz's massive body. Hiss. At this moment, Rokaz, who had already noticed, reacted with unparalleled speed. He took a deep breath and stomped heavily on the muddy ground, forcefully crossing the Dawnbreaker Warhammer and blood scythe in his palms, blocking them in front of his entire body. Boom, boom, boom. Even though the explosive fire from a large number of shells completely engulfed Rokaz, and the violently erupting shockwave cleared the rain and air within a radius of several hundred meters. Rokaz barely managed to remain unscathed thanks to the powerful defense capabilities of his vibranium power armor and the powerful conversion field generated by his rosary. His magnetic boots only slid back a few meters before he completely recovered. Ha! As Rokaz let out a muffled roar from inside his skull helmet. A series of incredibly powerful psychic rays rapidly bloomed outwards from the center of his forehead. These brilliant beams, capable of penetrating heavy armor, almost instantly melted and pierced through the cockpits of several heavy vehicles, completely destroying them in place. At this moment, perhaps because the slaughter caused by Rokaz, as a Primarch, in a short period of time was too astonishing. Or perhaps the Chaos Lord of the Soul Grinders Warband believed that it was not advisable to continue fighting at this time. Nearly hundreds of Chaos Astartes who had revealed their presence, along with a number of heavy vehicles, did not launch another attack. Instead, they began to retreat into the depths of the rainforest at a very rapid pace. Rokaz, standing in place with two weapons in hand, watched the large number of Chaos enemies slowly retreat, but did not immediately launch a surprise attack. Even though many Silver Skull's battle brothers clamored in his ears to pursue these Chaos Astartes, Rokaz, who knew that there was a huge difference in numbers between the two sides, remained unmoved. The Silver Skulls left to guard the homeworld, plus the Terminator bodyguard he brought, numbered only about 100. And according to the information relayed back by Doom and Trazyn, there were already 3 Chaos Warbands showing signs of activity on the planet. This undoubtedly made the keen Rokaz sense a conspiracy brewing in advance. Immediately notify Doom and Trazyn, and tell them to shrink their battle lines as soon as possible, and not to continue tangling with the Chaos Warbands. In addition, Silver Skull's battle brothers, immediately activate the internal defense measures of the entire planet, gather a large number of barbarian tribes centered on the monastery fortress. I suspect this is more than just an invasion battle by Chaos Warbands. After there were no more tall figures of any Chaos Astartes in the scope of his visor, Rokaz, driving his vibranium power armor, suddenly turned around and quickly issued more orders through the communication channel. Pucci. Deep in the dense rainforest, far away from the monastery fortress. On the muddy ground where a large amount of turbid rain was constantly flowing everywhere. There were tens of thousands of barbarian flesh and blood and broken limbs everywhere. A large barbarian tribe had been completely slaughtered by a group of silent iron warriors, who piled up a large number of human corpses into an octagonal chaos summoning ritual. Before long, under the gaze of a warsmith wearing Chaos Terminator armor, several Chaos sorcerers with ferocious expressions slowly drove their power armor, adorned with human limbs, and stepped forward. Buzz, buzz, buzz. As the chaos energy emanating from every Chaos sorcerer's body and the blasphemous incantations echoing all around. A large amount of surging chaos energy began to rapidly gather above countless human remains, eventually coalescing into a chaos portal as high as 10 meters. However, at this time, no chaos demons emerged from within the newly opened chaos portal. Instead, a series of terrifyingly heavy footsteps gradually resounded in the ears of everyone around. The next second, all the Iron Warriors and the Warsmith standing near the Chaos Portal drove their power armor to kneel on one knee and even slowly lowered their heads. Thump. An incomparably huge magnetic boot, its surface seemingly gleaming with a dark luster, suddenly stepped out from inside the Chaos Portal and heavily crushed some of the human remains below. Immediately afterwards, a massive metal giant, about 6 meters tall, that looked like some kind of mechanical life form finally arrived in the real universe. Tell me, my dearest little brother has not yet left this planet. At this moment, on that dark metal face that seemed to be pieced together from countless mechanical parts, a fleeting, ferocious smile slowly appeared. The other party lowered the mechanical head, which was completely connected and fused with the massive power armor, and lightly asked the warsmith in front of him with an icy gaze. Great Lord of Iron, Argene Father, the ignorant Soul Grinders Warband and the Skull Takers Warband perfectly fulfilled their mission of attracting his attention. Your brother did not notice anything unusual. The warsmith, as a scion, spoke to the metal giant in front of him without raising his head. And the 4th Legion's Primarch, who had long since become a demon Primarch through faith in chaos, said in an extremely harsh mechanical voice. Ha ha. Incredibly precise data calculations and the witchcraft predictions from Magnus finally allowed us to track down his place of arrival for the first time, and it's fortunate that I didn't waste countless years of patient waiting. Children of the 4th Legion, since the end of the Great Heresy, I have never asked you to do anything for me. But today, I want all of you to fight for me once again. I want to personally peel off the armor and skin from 22 on the battlefield, pull out his spine and skull, in order to eliminate the hatred and anger I have accumulated for nearly 10,000 years. Tell my little brother, Perturabo has come to seek revenge on him. Dark clouds loomed above the gloomy sky. A superstorm, brewing for a long time within the Savia planet, was constantly gathering energy. In the dense rainforest, centered around the Silver Skull Chapter's fortress monastery, metal fortresses and firepower platforms within a 20-kilometer radius had fully revealed themselves from their camouflage. A large number of newly awakened servitors and cogitator arrays were rapidly receiving orders and updating combat instructions. At the same time, countless barbarian tribes, summoned by the Silver Skulls, had arrived on the grounds of the fortress monastery. Each of them looked like ignorant children. They kept widening their eyes and scanning back and forth at the Astartes who were reinforcing the fortress walls and setting up heavy firepower defense platforms. When 3 colossal ancient dreadnoughts slowly stepped out of the monastery's underground warehouse, waves of exclamations and sighs rose repeatedly from the honest and well-behaved primitive barbarians sitting on the ground. Subsequently, an ancient knowledge crown, originally used to instill combat skills into Astartes recruits, was pushed out by several Silver Skull veterans. They began to instill a large amount of combat knowledge and battlefield instructions into the surrounding primitive barbarians. Even if this foreign knowledge would greatly disrupt the primitive barbarians' previous worldviews or precious memories, the veterans had no intention of stopping. If there were no accidents, the vast majority of the primitive barbarians would not survive until the next rainy season. Rather than dying tragically and becoming sacrifices to chaos, it would be better to dedicate their last lives to the Silver Skulls and the Primarch. At this moment, Rorschach, clad in vibranium power armor, stood at the very top of the fortress monastery. He narrowed his eyes and stared into the misty depths of the distant rainforest. Faint strands of resonance from the bloodline of his brothers made him subconsciously take a deep breath of the cold, damp air. He lowered his head slightly, overlooking the hundreds of thousands of primitive barbarians and scattered Astartes below, and faintly let out a sigh that dissipated with the wind. When this war ends, I wonder how many people will survive. Dong, dong, dong. Just then, slightly hurried footsteps came from behind Rorschach. Chief Librarian Vashiro, whose power armor's ceramite shell was covered with numerous scars, revealed his tall figure with a solemn expression. He first bowed slightly to the Primarch's massive back, and then said in a low voice, "Primarch, the Silver Skull's main fleet is engaged in fierce combat with the Iron Warrior's Chaos Fleet at the edge of the system. Our chapter master Argentius is doing his best to break through the enemy's encirclement and rush towards our homeworld. According to my predictions, we need to hold out in the fortress monastery for at least 15 days to wait for reinforcements to arrive." As soon as Vashiro finished speaking, Rorschach said without turning his head, 3 to 7 days is the limit of what we can hold out for. If I'm not mistaken, the one commanding this war is probably an old acquaintance of mine, Perturabo, the Lord of the Iron Warriors. He won't give us a chance to receive reinforcements, and siege warfare happens to be his forte. Vashiro, let all the battle brothers prepare themselves, this may be the most difficult battle we face. At this moment, Chief Librarian Vashiro, hearing Rorschach's words, simply nodded slightly. He unhesitatingly activated his power armor and turned to walk towards the lower levels of the monastery. Not long after, Rorschach, who hadn't turned around, suddenly spoke. "You actually came back. I thought you had run away in advance. Respected human Primarch, I am your Xenos advisor. If I were to run away secretly, the illustrious name of Trazyn the Infinite would be ruined." Trazyn, holding the empathic obliterator, slowly appeared at the edge of the monastery's platform. He shook his silver skull head slightly, stepped to Rorschach's side, and said calmly, "According to my reconnaissance, the Chaos Astartes from several warbands combined probably number in the thousands, with countless heavy vehicles and demon units. Plus a demon Primarch. Are you planning to fight this war with these hundreds of thousands of primitive barbarians who can't even operate lasguns properly, and 100 Astartes?" Facing Trazyn's question, Rorschach, slightly raising his gaze and staring at the gloomy sky, said in a deep voice, "Truth be told, I can leave with the Silver Skulls and the Terminator Guard right now. This is just a failed prayer mission support. After all, it's not like we haven't experienced it before. But this homeworld will become Perturabo's object of venting, and countless mortals will be completely reduced to tragic playthings in the hands of chaos. And my combat will and responsibility as a Primarch do not allow me to desert, especially when facing those traitor brothers." Hearing Rorschach's words, Trazyn couldn't help but shake the empathic obliterator. He raised his silver skull head, his eye sockets emitting a faint green light, staring intently at Rorschach's profile, and said in a low voice, "Respected human Primarch, even if I can't guess your resurrection ability for the time being, I can be sure that you are not immortal right now. You can't replicate the special method you used when you met me. Aren't you afraid of death?" "Hey, afraid of death, does that mean I won't die?" Taking a deep breath, Rorschach did not directly answer Trazyn's question. He simply turned his gaze and looked down at Trazyn's silver skull head, saying, "Trazyn, when necessary, I will open the teleportation gate to the returning fleet. You will lead my Terminator Guard and the Silver Skulls in a retreat." However, at this moment, before Rorschach could finish speaking, Trazyn, raising a metallic palm and shaking it, directly interrupted him. He said in a deep voice, "If your sons find out that only I have successfully returned, then they will tear my metal body to pieces, 100%. Respected Primarch, whether your previous words were sincere or a long-planned scheme, we who are already on the same boat must learn to trust and help each other. Since you humans lack a large number of combat personnel right now, then let me, the Necron Overlord, fill in the gap for you." At this moment, Rorschach, frowning slightly, stared at Trazyn's metallic face, which glowed with a bright luster. he asked in a puzzled tone. Trazyn, although I know you have a habit of carrying collectibles and subordinates, I hope even more that you actually carry a fully fledged Necron army. Heh. Trazyn, unable to move his mouth, let out a low laugh and shook his silver skull head slightly. He nonchalantly teased the human Primarch in front of him. Respected human Primarch, you really underestimate me, Trazyn the Infinite. What is a mere army worth? I brought 5 with me. Rumble. A dull rumble of thunder echoed from within the thick clouds. A torrent of icy rain suddenly descended upon the jungle-clad world of Savia. Countless raindrops cascaded from the broad leaves, splashing against the hulking forms of Chaos Astartes as they marched forward in silence, their boots magnetized to the ground. Streams of crystal-clear water flowed along the seams and grooves of their ceramide armor, eventually reaching the muddy ground. There, they were quickly crushed beneath the metal treads of heavy vehicles, along with the surrounding vegetation and trees, as the vehicles slowly advanced. At this moment, the first wave of thousands of Chaos Astartes, accompanied by an even greater number of heavy vehicles, emerged from the rain-soaked depths of the jungle, their towering figures exuding an aura of dread. Rows of iron warriors, wielding heavy boarding shields, advanced in an exceptionally tight, almost synchronized formation. Meanwhile, World Eaters from the Skulltaker Warband and Chaos Astartes from the Soul Maw Warband gripped their varied and grotesque demon weapons, following behind the massive steel phalanx in a disorganized mob. Boom boom boom. Instantly, upon the issuance of silent commands, dozens of biomechanical constructs, the Obliterators, began to stir with their heavy steps. They raised the living cannons that sprouted from their massive bodies, guiding more heavy vehicles to unleash a devastating barrage upon the metal fortress zone ahead. As countless shells screamed through the air and slammed into the ground, turning many metal fortresses into heaps of twisted wreckage. The cogitator arrays and servitors, awakened by the barrage, began to retaliate with the firepower of their defense platforms. At this moment, there were no superfluous sounds. Only the echoing roars of explosions, one after another. Thus, the initial act of this war of vengeance between Primarch and Primarch began. Thud thud thud. The Iron Warriors, raising their boarding shields in unison like conjoined twins, stepped forward. With each advance, they raised their bolters and unleashed a concentrated barrage of fire into the dense jungle ahead, rapidly expanding their field of vision. Meanwhile, heavy weapons squads, concealed within the massive steel phalanx, seized the opportunity to launch more whirlwind missiles, attempting to quickly eliminate the remaining metal fortresses that still stubbornly resisted. Soon, as time passed, every metal fortress within a 15-kilometer radius was swiftly flattened by the combined might of the massive steel phalanx and the heavy vehicles. This allowed the Chaos forces to quickly clear a wide path through the jungle, leading directly to the front of the monastery fortress. Roar. At this moment, the Skulltaker Warband and the Soul Maw Warband's Chaos Astartes, their bloodlust reaching a fever pitch, surged out from the sides of the steel phalanx. With little regard for discipline, they charged towards the massive walls of the monastery fortress, their power armor warped by demonic mutations. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. But then, led by nimble pilots, squadrons of tomb blades, each several meters long, rapidly ascended from within the monastery. These tomb blades, forming a flying squadron, unleashed a fierce barrage of arc fire upon the Chaos Astartes below, like bombers. Instantly, terrifying arcs of electricity danced across the hulking bodies of the Chaos Astartes, causing many to lose their momentum. Some were burned to death on the spot by the rapidly accumulating electrical discharge, while others were vaporized into clouds of dissipating green atoms by the ensuing Gauss flare beams. At the same time, countless Necron warriors, led by Necron immortals, surged from the depths of the jungle floor within a 5-kilometer radius. Their sheer numbers were so great that they completely surrounded most of the Chaos Astartes. However, the Chaos Astartes quickly demonstrated their combat prowess as battle-hardened veterans. Even the undisciplined World Eaters Warband, after suffering approximately a few dozen casualties, successfully engaged the surrounding Necron warriors in fierce close-quarters combat. Meanwhile, The Iron Warriors, quickly shifting to a defensive formation, suffered minimal losses, as their rapidly deployed missiles and artillery fire steadily diminished the effectiveness of the Tomb Blade's surprise attack. Thud thud thud. At that moment, dozens of massive, scorpion-like destroyers leapt from the towering walls of the monastery. Wielding their metallic limbs and phase blades, they launched a slaughterous charge against the Chaos forces, like a terrifying train of metal. Even the World Eaters, renowned for their close-quarters combat skills, struggled to withstand the onslaught of the swarming destroyers, becoming victims of the relentlessly chopping phase blades. Rumble. The Obliterators, their living cannons rapidly rotating, received orders from the Chaos Command. They quickly shifted their massive bodies, leading more heavy vehicles in a continuous barrage against the destroyers inside the battlefield, even if it meant accidentally hitting allied Chaos forces. Meanwhile, the massive steel phalanx gradually advanced with unwavering determination. Countless Iron Warriors, showing no sign of retreat, raised their boarding shields and engaged the Necron Warriors, who had also quickly formed a battle line, in a relentless and brutal assault. Boom boom boom. Bolter rounds slammed into the metallic bodies of the Necron Warriors. The overwhelming physical damage reduced many Necron Warriors to metallic debris, collapsing heavily onto the muddy ground. At the same time, green beams pierced through the dense rain, turning Chaos Astartes holding boarding shields into dissipating green atoms. Rumble. The next second, hundreds of stasis grenades were suddenly launched from within the steel phalanx towards the center of the Necron warrior formation. After the unfolding stasis fields temporarily froze the movements of most of the Necron warriors, the Iron Warriors, quickly changing their tactics, wielded their melee weapons and frantically reduced the vast numbers of Necron warriors. Clack clack clack. At this moment, a massive doomsday arc, shaped like a scorpion's tail, slowly rose from within the monastery fortress. It swiftly moved above the entire battlefield. If the Doomsday Arc successfully charged its devastating Doomsday Cannon, even the Iron Warriors, who were still maintaining their complete formation below, would be annihilated on the spot. But just as the Doomsday Arc began to charge its terrifying Doomsday Cannon, rumble, plasma beams suddenly erupted from the depths of the jungle, slamming into the Doomsday Arc's armored hull. Massive explosions erupted, causing the ship to lose its levitation power and crash heavily towards the battlefield below. Rumble. Accompanying the terrifying tremor as the crashed Doomsday Arc collided with the muddy ground. The second wave, a massive iron formation composed of thousands of Iron Warriors, once again marched out from the depths of the rain-soaked rainforest. Following closely behind, batches of mortal slave troops from the Iron Star and a large number of primitive barbarians forcibly conscripted as cannon fodder surged out from the rear of the iron formation like a raging tide. Countless laser beams and plasma, or even solid bullets, continuously ravaged over half of the battlefield. Countless mortal slaves and emotionless Necron warriors clashed head-on. Even as their casualty numbers rapidly increased, they showed no intention of retreating. Taking advantage of this opportunity, two massive iron formations with completely different offensive rhythms began to advance continuously, quickly traversing the front lines that were being heavily bombarded. Wog! Just then, from the depths of the dense rainforest on the flank of the entire battlefield, a series of barbarian roars rose and fell. In the next moment, countless primitive barbarians wielding laser guns or metal weapons, personally led by Doom and others. They quickly rushed out of their long-hidden positions, launching a continuous death charge towards the rear of the Chaos Astartes lines. At the same time, Rorschach, clad in vibranium power armor, also led dozens of fully armed Astartes on his massive frame. Like a sharp arrow shot out, they burst out from the huge gate of the monastery fortress. Without stopping, they launched an astonishing combat charge towards the massive formation of Iron Warriors. Rumble. At this moment, Rorschach, as the spearhead of the assault squad, suddenly brandished the Dawnbreaker Warhammer tightly gripped in his palm. This incredibly powerful melee weapon, accompanied by layers of rain and visible shockwaves, heavily struck the thick boarding shields. Pung pung pung. A large number of boarding shields shattered instantly, and as countless metal fragments splashed everywhere. One after another, burly iron warriors flew out into the surrounding air like rag dolls. Now, even if these ordinary Chaos Astartes formed a defensive formation, it would be difficult to withstand the fierce attacks from the Primarch alone. And behind them, almost all of the Astartes, having replaced their melee weapons with phase swords. Also rapidly brandished xenophase blades shrouded in green light, constantly chopping at the surrounding iron warriors. Thump thump thump. The Iron Warrior formation, forcibly broken through by the assault squad led by Rourke, quickly changed its combat mode. They desperately activated their power armor, using melee weapons and boarding shields to heavily collide with the tall bodies of the Astartes, attempting to divide this tightly maintained charge formation. Chi chi chi. In the next moment, Rourke, whose magnetic boots suddenly unleashed Shadow Step, shuttled back and forth between a large number of iron warriors like a ghostly black shadow. The blood scythe in his other palm constantly swept across the heads covered by metal helmets, quickly reaping the fragile lives of countless chaos traders. However, just as the first Iron Warrior formation was about to be forcibly broken through by the Primarch and many Astartes who were about to unleash slaughter. Swish swish swish. A thick, crimson beam of light, as thick as a bucket, suddenly streaked across the sky above half of the battlefield. Incredibly accurately hitting Rourke, who had just leapt into the air. Crack. In a flash, the powerful force field stimulated by the Rosarius was instantly overloaded by the out-of-spec damage. And the vibranium power armor worn on Rourke's massive frame also temporarily turned red and hot due to the rapidly rising scorching temperature. Even his entire body fell heavily towards the muddy ground hundreds of meters away due to the extremely powerful impact force. Boom. After the incomparably thick crimson beam of light completely dissipated, Rourke, wearing a skull helmet, took a deep breath. He quickly propped up his faintly red vibranium power armor from the muddy, bloody ground. A large amount of icy rain falling from the sky was being evaporated into constantly dissipating white mist by the scalding vibranium shell. My dear little brother, miss me. I've missed you so much. Just then, a massive metal giant, about 6 meters tall, appearing on the fierce battlefield, its entire body resembling a mechanical life form, revealed a terrifying figure. The other party quickly transformed the huge hand cannon that was emitting a large amount of white mist back into a metal palm. Then, the other metal palm hanging beside it instantly transformed into a giant blade gleaming with cold light. Perturabo. At this moment, Rourke, subconsciously letting out a low, angry roar from inside his skull helmet, suddenly activated his cooled-down vibranium power armor. His massive body, like a rumbling steel train that had started up, rapidly charged towards the massive metal giant thousands of meters away. Thump thump thump. At the same time, Perturabo, unable to resist squeezing out a hideous smile from his metal face, also desperately activated his even larger metal body. His entire being, wrapped in an extremely terrifying sound of rushing through the air. Without any hesitation, he launched a counter-charge towards Rourke. Rumble. In an instant, visible terrifying shockwaves suddenly bloomed in the depths of the layers of rain. The incomparably massive Perturabo and Rourke, clad in vibranium power armor, heavily collided together. And the Dawnbreaker Warhammer and Bloodscythe that Rourke suddenly swung up, also fiercely intersected with the other party's giant blade, emitting deafening metallic buzzing sounds. Boom boom boom. However, at this time, Rourke, whose weight and size were completely at a disadvantage, even though he had deeply stomped his 2 magnetic boots into the depths of the ground. His entire person was still being rapidly pushed back by Perturabo, who was constantly emitting a low, sinister laugh. Heh heh, my dear little brother, why can't you hold on as soon as we meet? Do you know how long I've been preparing for today's revenge? I'm going to personally pull out your spine and twist off your head. At this moment, Perturabo's mocking words echoed continuously in Rourke's ears. Rourke, wearing the skull helmet, did not utter any words. He simply raised his head slightly. The Mind Stone located above his forehead instantly bloomed with a dazzling psychic ray, heavily striking Perturbo's thick chest armor. Chi. Even the thick armor outside Perturbo's massive body. And the completely metallized chaos mechanical body could not stop this terrifying psychic ray. A melted wound, transparent from front to back, instantly appeared in the center of the other party's chest, emitting wisps of constantly rising white mist. But in the next moment, Perturbo, seemingly not caring about the fatal wound, suddenly brandished a huge iron fist, heavily striking the front of Rourke's skull helmet. Bang! The immense impact instantly made Rorschach, clad in the skull helmet, feel a burst of dizziness. A faint, metallic golden blood trickled from his nostrils and mouth, the all-too-familiar taste of iron blooming on his tongue. The next second, Rorschach, fighting against the dizziness, clenched his teeth with all his might. The two vibranium wings behind the vibranium power armor suddenly spread outwards. Like a pair of sharp metal appendages, they pierced Perturbo's massive body, repeatedly churning inside. However, at this moment, Perturbo, wielding his heavy iron fists in succession, grinned and roared. 22. Accept your fate. My demon-ascended mechanical body has completely lost the fatal weaknesses of carbon-based life. For this moment of revenge and power, I have chosen to abandon my humanity. As the terrifying iron fists, accompanied by fierce gusts of wind, repeatedly struck, the skull helmet, made of living metal and vibranium modules, began to twist and deform. After the defensive strength noticeably decreased, it even became dilapidated, completely exposing Rorschach's flesh blurred, bronze face to the increasingly dense and humid air. Chiz. Just then, the blood scythe, originally used by Rorschach to parry the giant blade, suddenly flipped backward. Then, the sharp blade, wreathed in green light, swiftly drew a large circle in midair, cutting into Perturbo's armpit at an extremely tricky angle. It directly cleaved the opponent's entire thick arm from his massive metal body. Thud! When Perturbo's thick arm rolled and landed, the severed limb, without any blood flowing out, began to crawl towards the direction of his massive metal body as if it possessed life. Rorschach, activating Shadow Step with his magnetic boots, instantly transformed into a wisp of dark shadow, falling heavily backward. He chose to temporarily distance himself from the demon Primarch, whose expression grew increasingly furious. At this moment, Rorschach, having realized that close combat was essentially ineffective, slightly widened his blood-covered eyes. He took a deep breath. The Dawnbreaker Warhammer and Blood Scythe, which had been tightly held in his palms, were quickly stored into the inventory page. Then, dozens of thermal detonators, already armed, were thrown into the air in one go. 22. You want to try that again? Did you think I had no defenses against your combat habits? Perturbo, whose severed arm had reattached, suddenly erupted in a roar that echoed around him. Metal spikes, resembling energy nozzles, rapidly condensed from the surfaces of his massive body. The next second, beams of terrifying red light continuously swept outwards from within the densely packed metal spikes. In the blink of an eye, they forcibly cut dozens of thermal detonators, which had not yet exploded, into scattered pieces of metal debris. Buzz. Seeing that his attempt to repeat the thermal detonator tactic had been completely thwarted, Rorschach suddenly fixed his blood-red gaze on the dark sky above, and almost immediately condensed the vibranium wings behind him into propulsion devices. He drew the forge heart from the vibranium power armor's waist, and while treading on the ground, ascended into the air, pulling the trigger of the weapon at Perturbo, who was charging madly forward. Chiz. Plasma spheres, launched from the black muzzle, instantly submerged Perturbo's massive metal body. The surface of his mechanical demon body, which was almost immune to any physical damage, rapidly melted. In fact, even if it were true, as Perturbo said, that his demon-ascended body had completely lost the weaknesses of carbon-based life, becoming a metal-based silicon lifeform also meant that he had to abide by more fundamental and widespread physical rules. For example, extreme heat sufficient to melt any metal, or the terrifying lightning from nature. 22. At this moment, Perturbo, believing that Rorschach intended to flee, seemed to have temporarily lost his sanity. He forcibly endured the repeated bombardment of countless scorching plasma, violently shaking his massive metal demon body. In the blink of an eye, a pair of giant jet engines, erupting with crimson flames, forcibly condensed from the back of his broad spine. Rumble. Perturabo, rapidly breaking free from the Earth's gravity, locked onto Rorschach's tall figure like a launched metal missile. Rorschach, whose cold eyes showed no fear or evasion, skillfully controlled the vibranium power armor's propulsion devices, flying back and forth. He continuously pulled the trigger of the Forgeheart in his palm, using plasma spheres to bombard Perturabo's massive body, continuously attracting the relentless Perturabo, guiding him to fly rapidly towards the depths of the dark sky, where terrifying thunderclaps frequently echoed. 500 meters, 1,000 meters, 3,000 meters. As the distance rapidly increased, beams of crimson light from Perturabo narrowly grazed the propulsion devices behind Rorschach's back. Rorschach, constantly glancing back to check on his opponent, also continuously changed his flight trajectory, quickly dodging Perturabo's continuous ranged energy bombardment and furious roars. Soon after, when wisps of moist, humid, and turbid clouds permeated the surroundings of the two, Rorschach's tall figure suddenly stopped in the air. He suddenly turned to stare at the demon Primarch Perturabo, who was rapidly flying towards him. "Hey, Perturabo, do you know a simple truth that even mortal children understand?" At this moment, Rorschach, his scarred bronze face covered in goosebumps, roared at his opponent in a deep voice. Perturabo, whose metal face only showed ferocity and hatred, seemed not to care. He violently transformed his two giant hand cannons into a pair of giant blades radiating cold light, and roared as he charged towards Rorschach. That is, on rainy days, never put metal objects in higher places. At this moment, Rorschach, abruptly extinguishing his propulsion devices, suddenly began to fall downwards. Rumble. Accompanied by a deafening thunderclap and blinding lightning that illuminated the entire dark cloud, Perturabo, who was charging up with his giant jet engines, was instantly enveloped by terrifying lightning bolts of brilliant light. In an instant, the terrifying lightning, whose pure destructive power far exceeded that of thermal detonators, repeatedly raged inside Perturabo's massive metal body. Even more dazzling rays of lightning erupted from his constantly twisting and melting metal face. Ah! At this moment, accompanied by Perturabo's agonizing roar that almost echoed throughout the entire sky. Visible cracks and terrifying wounds continuously appeared across his massive metallic body. Immediately following, even the enormous jet engines that sustained his flight erupted into even more intense bursts of fiery explosions. Massive amounts of chaotic energy, scattered by the wind, spewed outwards from the depths of Perturabo's horrific wounds. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Rorschach, having restarted his propulsion systems, rapidly ascended into the air, braving the lingering streaks of lightning within the damp clouds. His massive form, clad in a vibranium-powered armor, abruptly shifted direction. A pair of magnetically sealed boots, gleaming with a faint golden light, stomped heavily towards the rapidly descending Perturabo with an utterly merciless stance. Thud. Perturabo, his metallic limbs twisted and deformed by the terrifying power of the lightning, was completely immobilized. The other party, mumbling incoherently, could only watch Rock's increasingly cold expression. Constantly accelerating his already heavy metallic body, propelling it towards the battlefield thousands of meters below. Boom boom boom, along with a terrifying roar that echoed across half the dark sky. The high-temperature flames generated by the violent friction between the metal and the humid air rapidly enveloped Perturabo's massive body. And just as the rapidly falling figures were about to collide violently with the ground of the battlefield, Rorschach, with a detached expression, took a deep breath. He abruptly increased the thrust of his propulsion systems, forcibly halting his entire body in the swaying, rain-swept air. Rumble. In an instant, a massive crater, roughly dozens of meters in diameter, suddenly appeared amidst the muddy ground covered with countless corpses. The massive metallic body of the demon Primarch landed with unparalleled precision at the very bottom of the 20-meter-deep pit. And judging from his miserable appearance, devoid of any movement. Even if he wasn't killed on the spot, he was definitely severely injured and unconscious. Ah, our Gene Father has actually been defeated. At this moment, on the chaotic battlefield, repeatedly rocked by countless artillery explosions, a large number of Chaos Iron Warriors, who were engaged in fierce combat with the densely packed Necron Warriors, or the Astartes, suddenly ceased all offensive actions. Almost all of them were stunned for a moment. They quickly activated their battle-scarred power armor, disregarding casualties. Like a pack of completely frenzied steel hounds, they began to sprint and rush towards the location where the demon Primarch had fallen. After all, in the eyes of these Chaos Astartes, who were the bloodline descendants, even at the cost of complete annihilation of their forces, as long as they could ensure that their great Gene Father successfully escaped the threat of death, the Iron Warriors would be completely willing to do so. Thump thump thump. One by one, Iron Warriors, their entire bodies exuding a terrifying aura, desperately converged towards the center of the battlefield. And Rorschach, who had landed violently from midair, instantly drew out those two incredibly powerful melee weapons, continuously hacking and hammering at the surging Chaos Astartes. Crack! Almost at the same time, the distant monastery fortress once again opened its incredibly heavy metal gate. The Necron overlord Trazyn the Infinite, wielding the empathic obliterator, led a reanimator cohort with even more terrifying combat power, charging fiercely into the interior of the battlefield. All of them wielded hyperface swords and gauntlets of fire in their palms, rapidly cutting through most of the chaotic battlefield, constantly advancing rapidly towards the location of the demon Primarch and Rorschach. Human Primarch, take this Tesseract Labyrinth. Since killing the demon Primarch is pointless, then you must capture him alive. At this moment, Trazyn, constantly wielding the empathic obliterator, instantly rushed to a place not far from Rorschach. Without any hesitation, he took out a Tesseract Labyrinth. Then, he swiftly threw it towards the Primarch, who was engaged in a frenzied slaughter. Bang! Rorschach, who had already noticed the movements of Trazyn and the others, abruptly activated his vibranium-powered armor. He swiftly turned around, cleaving and killing an Iron Warrior who was attempting a sneak attack. Then, he grabbed the Tesseract Labyrinth, which was tumbling back and forth in the heavy rain. The next second, Rorschach casually activated the Tesseract Labyrinth's containment function, and swiftly threw the Xenos artifact in his palm towards the bottom of the huge pit not far away. And the demon Primarch Perturabo, who had just regained some consciousness and was suffering from serious injuries, was almost instantly recovered into the pocket dimension, from which even the more terrifying shards of the star gods could not truly escape. Heart of iron, steel without and steel within. Heart of iron, steel without and steel within. At this moment, the Chaos Iron Warriors, seemingly vaguely sensing the complete disappearance of the demon Primarch through their bloodline connection, abruptly issued a series of fierce battle roars filled with endless grief towards the torrential, rain-swept, dark sky. Their combat capabilities seemed to have increased several times out of thin air, and they constantly launched self-destructive death attacks against the surrounding Astartes and Necron warriors. This also rapidly increased the casualty rate suffered by countless Necron warriors and even the already scarce Astartes. Rumble. At this moment, a series of terrifying rumbles from above everyone's heads also made Rorschach, with a solemn expression, subconsciously raise his bronze-colored face. His incomparably sharp vision penetrated the layers of rain, and he saw at a glance that the Astartes drop pods, wrapped in dazzling flames on their thick outer shells, were rapidly deploying in large numbers above the entire battlefield. Primarch, Warmaster Argentius has successfully broken through ahead of schedule. Our Silver Skull's main reinforcements have finally arrived. The next second, the deep voice from Librarian Vashro quickly echoed in Rock's ears through the communication channel. And Rorschach, who had moved his cold gaze back from the dark sky to the fierce battlefield, breathed a sigh of relief, and slowly gripped the melee weapon in his palm. He began to activate his vibranium-powered armor towards the front. Once again, the entire person launched a combat charge towards countless Chaos Astartes. Now, with the successive arrival of the Silver Skull's main force, The invasion and revenge plan personally launched by the demon Primarch Perturabo was completely bankrupt. Not only would the large number of Chaos Astartes on the fierce battlefield be completely wiped out, which was already a certainty. Even the other party himself had unfortunately fallen into Rock's hands. Of course, from now on, all the Iron Warriors' Chaos warbands scattered throughout the galaxy, as well as the countless warsmiths inside the Iron Stars, will also become terrifying forces that surround and intercept Primarch Rorschach. In order to completely recapture their Gene Father, they will inevitably choose to fight to the death. When the gloomy skies of the Savia homeworld cleared a little, and the rain temporarily subsided into a drizzle, after days of continuous and arduous fighting, the Silver Skull chapter, led by Primarch Rorschach and the Terminator Guard, together with Trazen's vast Necron army and Doom's primitive barbarians, completely annihilated the Chaos Astartes, mortal slave troops, and numerous heavy vehicles on the entire battlefield. This was undoubtedly a major victory worthy of being firmly etched in the annals of the Imperium's history. Because the people not only wiped out thousands of Chaos Astartes at once, but even directly captured the Iron Warriors Primarch. Even though Trazen, as the overlord of the Necrons, paid a huge price for this. But as long as he can successfully collect a real Primarch as one of his collections, it can be regarded as successfully achieving something he has dreamed of. However, when all the fighting was completely over, while the Astartes of the Silver Skull chapter were leading a large number of primitive barbarians to harvest the heads of the slain enemies all over the ground, Trazen, holding the empathic obliterator and the Tesseract Labyrinth, quickly moved with cheerful steps. He directly found Rorschach, who was sitting on a huge wooden stake recovering his strength, and respectfully handed over the Tesseract Labyrinth in his palm. Respected Primarch, this is the Tesseract Labyrinth that imprisons Perturabo. I have pondered it over and over again, and I think it should be your spoils of war. So, I brought it to you personally. As soon as Trazen's voice fell, Rorschach, who slowly opened his eyes, stared deeply at the Necron overlord in front of him. He took a deep breath of the humid air mixed with the smell of soil and blood, and said indifferently, Trazen, if you take Perturabo and run away, I won't blame you. After all, you have contributed a lot to the final victory of this war. However, your ability to restrain the great desire to forcefully possess it is also an eye-opener for me. At this moment, Trazen, hearing Rock's words, slightly shook his silver skull head. While handing the Tesseract Labyrinth to Rorschach once again, he said in a low voice, Heh, perhaps a living Primarch is indeed an invaluable collection, but compared with the trust between you and me, it is completely worthless. And for the sake of the last hope of the ancient Necron race, even if I pay all the price for it, it is worth it in my opinion. Trazen's voice slowly fell, and Rorschach, who was squinting his eyes, also raised his hand to take the Tesseract Labyrinth that imprisoned Perturabo. He closed his eyes slightly. His extended consciousness vaguely sensed the demon Primarch who was rampaging everywhere inside the labyrinth, constantly roaring but never breaking away from a certain range. The next second, Rorschach, who reopened his eyes, suddenly threw the Tesseract Labyrinth in his palm back to Trazen. And Trazen, who successfully caught the Tesseract Labyrinth, turned his silver skull head back and forth. He stared at the other party with a puzzled expression and asked, Respected human Primarch, what do you mean by this? I have nothing in common with the already ascended Primarch, especially the traitor brothers with twisted and paranoid personalities. Moreover, I don't have the ability to completely get rid of the influence of chaos. The Emperor may have this ability, but since she hasn't moved, it means the time has not come. So, I plan to temporarily exchange Perturabo for someone else with you. When we return to the fleet, just give me the clone of Fulgrim. Of course, I also need to explain to you that Perturabo is only temporarily handed over to you for collection and safekeeping. If there is a need, I will take it back from you. If you don't give it, I will suggest that the Emperor personally ask you for it, understand? At this moment, Rorschach, with an extremely indifferent expression on his face, slowly said to Trazen. And the Necron overlord, whose faint green light flickered a few times in his eye sockets, nodded without any hesitation and said, "No problem, Primarch, we have a deal." Not long after, inside the Silver Skull chapter's slightly dilapidated monastery fortress, the tall chapter master Argentius formally led hundreds of Silver Skull Astartes who arrived last to kneel before Primarch Rorschach. After everyone quickly activated their power armor and stood up from the ground, Rorschach, who was sitting inside a huge seat, also frankly expressed to the people of the Silver Skull his desire to take away a part of the manpower. Although Chapter Master Argentius secretly expressed some dissatisfaction with the Primarch's collusion with a Necron overlord. However, thanks to the brilliant achievements successfully obtained by Rorschach and others, he had to admire him wholeheartedly. Therefore, after the command hierarchy of the Silver Skull gathered together and discussed for a period of time, they finally unanimously decided that Chief Librarian Vashiro would lead 300 Silver Skull veterans, completely join the Primarch's legion and become a large company unit under his command. In the Silver Skull chapter, which was abolished by Rorschach on the spot, the number limit of the Astartes, Holy Book, once again obtained an unlimited number of replenishment orders. However, after this clean and neat discussion meeting temporarily ended, Chief Librarian Vashiro did not immediately turn around and leave. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, but still, after everyone dispersed, he drove his power armor to Rock's side. The other party revealed a huge secret to the Primarch, who was listening quietly, which was enough to subvert the entire chapter. That is, in this war not long ago, a small part of the Silver Skull's Astartes actually had some resonance and connection with the demon Primarch Perturbo between their bloodlines. This undoubtedly made the Silver Skull, who had always thought that they were Guilliman's descendants, and even imitated the Ultramarines chapter in their style of doing things, feel a little panicked. Perhaps their true origin is from this traitor Primarch who was successfully captured by Rorschach. However, at this time, Rorschach, who seemed to be somewhat aware of this, just shook his head slightly. He solemnly said to Chief Librarian Vashiro, who was standing in front of him, "Your Silver Skull chapter was Guilliman's descendants in the past, and will be the same in the future. You will even be the descendants of me, this lost Primarch, so there is no need to worry or fear. Your fighting will and tenacious soul have completely proven the loyalty of the Astartes and even the Emperor's angels. The bloodline from my traitorous brother has not polluted everything about you, but once again sets off the inferiority and stupidity of those traitors. As for this secret, after cleaning up the memories of those Astartes, let us forget it together." At the center of the massive Primarch fleet, in the upper deck chambers of the flagship, Kraken, buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by a sudden buzzing sound that echoed around, a warp gate quickly materialized inside the Primarch's private palace. Immediately after, the massive Lorgar, clad in vibranium power armor, heavily stomped one of his magnetic boots onto the cold, gleaming metal floor. Once he had completely stepped out of the warp gate, his nostrils flared unconsciously as he took a deep breath of the familiar scent unique to the ship. This allowed Lorgar's mental state to completely relax. Thump thump thump. The Doom, with his dark green cloak moving without wind, and Trazyn, holding the empathic obliterator, along with Chief Librarian Varro and 300 Silver Skull veterans, also stepped out of the warp gate, successfully arriving in the Primarch's fleet. Lorgar, standing to the side, pondered for a moment. He immediately assigned Doom, who was more familiar with the fleet's internal structure, the responsibility of guiding the newly formed Silver Skulls chapter and familiarizing them with all matters. Because there were no spare strike cruisers in the entire fleet to allocate to the Silver Skulls chapter as a chapter base. Therefore, the newly arrived Astartes planned to first make contact and integrate with the other chapters. At the same time, they chose to temporarily stay on the flagship to adapt to the future life of a ship-based chapter. Soon after everyone had paid their respects to the Primarch and left the private palace, Lorgar twisted his neck and casually threw out a small squad of servo-automata from his storage interface to assist him in disassembling the vibranium power armor that needed simple repairs. Trazyn, now that you have gained my trust and the authority to move freely, why do you still insist on staying in my palace all day long? Just then, Lorgar, who was cooperating with mechanical tentacles to disassemble his heavy armor, suddenly said without turning his head. Trazyn, who had casually placed the empathic obliterator down, sat generously in a Necron-style metal chair. While crossing his legs, he repeatedly fiddled with the tesseract labyrinth that imprisoned Perturabo with a metallic hand. Venerable Primarch, you are unaware, while I deeply miss those times when I possessed a flesh and blood body, I have long understood that I am no longer a living being. Therefore, there is no need for eating, resting, or even low-level matters such as personal privacy to hinder my free will. This, on the contrary, allows me to devote myself more wholeheartedly to my hobbies. Of course, if you believe that my presence is disturbing your personal space, then I can completely choose a ship in your fleet at random to serve as another secret tomb, just in case. At that moment, Trazyn, turning his silver skull head back and forth, slowly said to Lorgar's massive back. Lorgar, remaining silent, did not immediately respond. After the servo-automata had completely disassembled the vibranium power armor from his body, he stretched his strong shoulders and turned to Trazyn, saying, "If that's the case, then for the sake of the entire fleet's safety, it's best if you stay by my side at all times. Speaking of which, Trazyn, have you forgotten something important?" As soon as Lorgar's words fell, Trazyn, whose eye sockets were flashing with a faint green light, let out a low chuckle. He quickly put away the tesseract labyrinth in his palm. Then, he took out another tesseract labyrinth device that had never been opened. "Hee, Primarch, wasn't I just waiting for you to speak? Just like we agreed before, an invaluable demon Primarch, in exchange for a clone Primarch that can be discarded at any time. How could I possibly forget such a generous transaction?" Before Trazyn could finish speaking, the other party, who was crossing his legs, lightly shook his metallic hand. Without any hesitation, he released the being trapped inside the tesseract labyrinth. Chirp chirp chirp. At this moment, as a fleeting, brilliant green light rapidly bloomed within Lorgar and Trazyn's field of vision. A handsome man, nearly 4 meters tall, wearing battle-scarred purple gold power armor on his muscular body, instantly revealed an even larger figure. Lorgar, narrowing his eyes subconsciously, looked over. The eyes on the other party's almost perfect and delicate face were tightly closed. Strands of white hair, stained with dried blood, were casually draped on one side of his fair face, highlighting the charm and temperament exuded by the other party's entire body, making it even more unforgettable. "Hey, my dear Primarch brother, it's time to get up and work for the Emperor." Lorgar, unable to help but reveal a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth, instantly swayed his tall body and stepped forward. He opened his thick arms towards the other party, making a gesture of welcome. "Little brother, isn't this?" The next second, Fulgrim, who suddenly opened his tightly closed eyes, quickly stared at Lorgar in front of him. The expression on his extremely delicate face shifted slightly, and he muttered to himself. He seemed to be not yet fully awake from the side effects brought about by the stasis field and the memories of the past. After a few short seconds, Fulgrim, quickly returning to normal, blinked his cold eyes that still exuded a murderous intent. Then, the other party, who scanned his surroundings, suddenly activated his tattered purple gold power armor. His massive body was like a nimble purple phoenix dancing. Wrapped in a terrifying murderous aura, he pounced on Trazyn in the distance. "Wait, clone, I am." At this moment, before Trazyn, who was sitting on the metal chair, could completely finish speaking, Fulgrim's long accumulated angry blow completely blasted Trazyn's living metal body, along with everything, including the chair, away. However, just as a trace of helplessness appeared on Lorgar's face, and he was about to step forward to mediate, Fulgrim, who had slowly lowered his ceramite power fist, stopped his magnetic boots. He turned his head and said solemnly to Lorgar, "Little brother, I know you have reached some kind of agreement with this damned Xenos, which is why he released me. Now that I am standing here, why don't we?" Fulgrim, My brother, the Xenos advisor Trazyn still has other uses. Before he truly threatens the entire fleet or even the homeworld, I don't plan to completely destroy him. Most importantly, this guy always carries a large number of stand-ins with him because he has offended too many forces. Look, he's already back. At this moment, Lorgar, shaking his head slightly, explained to Fulgrim. He raised his hand and pointed to Trazyn the Infinite, who was standing next to a destroyed body. Over the next period, after repeated persuasion from Rourke, Fulgrim, whose emotions had gradually stabilized, temporarily suppressed the idea of launching a revenge attack against Trazyn. Rourke seized the opportunity to pull Fulgrim down to sit. He began to slowly recount to Fulgrim, whose brows gradually furrowed, the difficult situation currently facing the Imperium of Man, and the series of events following the Regent Guilliman's awakening and return. At this moment, Trazyn, who had just replaced his metal body, stood aside quietly listening to the conversation between the Primarchs. He would occasionally endure Fulgrim's icy gaze, and a string of words would pop out of his silver skull head. Like a qualified aide, he supplemented Rourke's knowledge of the overall situation with some very unique Xenos perspectives. However, when Fulgrim unexpectedly learned that Rourke and the others had actually succeeded in capturing the demon Primarch Perturabo not long ago, the brows that had been tightly furrowed relaxed slightly. He even gently patted Rourke's shoulder with a ceramite hand. Like a dutiful older brother, he repeatedly praised his little brother's progress and growth. Rourke, with a slight smile, did not decline the praise. He was able to get to where he was today. In addition to the protection from the Emperor, it was also closely related to his own tenacious fighting spirit. Not long after, as an order from Rourke spread throughout the entire Primarch fleet, all the Astartes who had not participated in the support operation gathered inside the flagship, Kraken. Every company captain was secretly guessing with their adjutants whether there was an apocalyptic-level difficult battle that required their full involvement. However, when Fulgrim, who seemed to have been completely renewed after temporarily donning the rings of volcanic power armor, appeared together with Rourke, who had a smile on his face, almost every Astartes standing in place was slightly stunned. Their widened eyes were filled with a kind of disbelief. Even if none of them were gene sons of Fulgrim. But seeing a human giant with such a conspicuous physique and outstanding charm with their own eyes. I am afraid that apart from another gene Primarch, no other reference could be found, right? For the Emperor. For the Primarch. For the Legion. In the next second, everyone, vigorously raising their ceramite iron fists, suddenly erupted in deafening shouts and roars. Rourke, who also raised a huge palm towards the top of his head, immediately formally announced to the people in front of him. The true Emperor's Phoenix, Gene Primarch Fulgrim has returned to the embrace of the Emperor and the Imperium of Man. And has joined his 22nd Legion. Dash 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 dash. Ha! Rourke's huge body was not wearing any power armor. His expression was slightly ferocious as he completed the exhalation. Subsequently, a thick arm with bulging muscles fell suddenly. The Dawnbringer Warhammer, which had always been tightly held in his palm, instantly wrapped in a terrifying whistling sound, and heavily smashed onto a vibranium ingot that emitted a dark red light. And this ingot, which had been subjected to high-temperature baking for a long time and successfully reached the critical point of processing, instantly deformed and twisted, and also continuously splashed out a large number of orange-red sparks. Pung pung pung. At the same time, Fulgrim, who was also not wearing power armor, also waved a power hammer with a calm expression. The heavy hammer head, catching up with the gap between Rourke's action of raising the Dawnbringer Warhammer, heavily struck the vibranium ingot that was extending and deforming. At this moment, inside the forged ship of the Primarch fleet, Rourke and Fulgrim were jointly forging a Primarch-level melee weapon belonging to Fulgrim. More accurately, Fulgrim, who was proficient in forging techniques, was grasping the overall progress of the weapon's forging. Rourke was only responsible for exerting his strength, and also learning some more basic forging techniques. Pung pung pung. As time continued to pass. And with the repeated hammering of the two men, one hammer after another. A giant one-handed sword that had been thoroughly tempered and was more suitable for the Primarch's physique gradually showed its initial form. Fulgrim, whose expression became more and more solemn, took a deep breath of hot air. He nodded to Rourke opposite him without hesitation. Rourke, who suddenly dropped the Dawnbringer warhammer in his palm, quickly retreated a few steps, and stood quietly aside. He began to watch Fulgrim, who was frantically waving the power hammer, with his own eyes, using a sophisticated processing technique that was almost perfect art, begin the final stage of weapon forging. Boom boom boom. Before long, the giant one-handed sword that had been completely formed was quickly flicked by Fulgrim with lightning-fast and precise angles into the depths of a special sacred oil produced by a large number of mechanicum. Chi chi chi. In an instant, a large number of hot bubbles and white smoke generated by high-temperature quenching continuously surged up from the container holding the special sacred oil. Rourke keenly noticed that the giant one-handed sword, which had almost sunk to the bottom of the container, also faintly flashed a wisp of incomparably bright silver light. At this moment, Fulgrim, whose white hair was simply tied up, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Although his little brother Rourke had provided him with a lot of vibranium ingots to practice with, and the two of them were mentally prepared for a long-term struggle. But being able to complete the melee weapon forging in one go. For his clone brother, who was not his real body, it was also a rare good thing. Little brother, thank you for your great help. This melee weapon carefully forged by you and me has been completed, next we will have to see how powerful it is. Fulgrim, with a hint of a smile on his expression, turned his head and said to Rourke, who was also curious, in a deep voice. He suddenly stepped forward and stretched out a huge, unprotected palm. Unexpectedly, he fished out the giant one-handed sword from the depths of the scalding sacred oil, whose residual heat had not yet dissipated. Buzz buzz buzz. When Fulgrim carefully examined the giant one-handed sword, which was about 1.8 meters long, in his palm, he also gently waved this Antarctic vibranium Primarch-level weapon in the air beside him. In an instant, around the slender sword body, which was glowing with silvery white luster, a wisp of visible distorted sound wave ripples suddenly emerged. Boom boom boom. In the next moment, Fulgrim's footsteps moved back and forth. The amplitude of his repeated waving of the weapon and the speed of his attacks also became more and more clean and neat. This giant one-handed sword, which was wrapped in an ear-piercing scream all over its body, quickly took the tip of the sword as its direction. Continuously emitted a series of supersonic air-splitting slashes composed of countless terrifying sound waves. After a simple test by Rourke and Fulgrim, they found that ordinary ceramite power armor was almost difficult to resist this extremely special sonic penetration and resonance bombardment. Even more sturdy and thick Terminator armor. It is difficult to withstand the indestructible force from Antarctic vibranium with the defensive ability of the material itself. Once Rogue and Fulgrim completed the forging of the weapons, they also, with the assistance of many techmarines, quickly began basic modifications to the volcano pattern power armor. Such as replacing the ceramite shell with a more durable vibranium shell, and even repainting the entire armor purple, and so on. Soon after, Fulgrim and Rogue, having completed everything, began a friendly sparring match in the training grounds. If Fulgrim's fighting style was nearly perfect technique, coupled with strength and speed that were not weak even among the Primarchs, then Rogue's fighting style, aside from those underhanded tricks, was simply using brute force to overcome all. Of course, this isn't to say that Rogue had no combat skills. But it's just that most of the enemies he faced now could hardly withstand a casual swing of his hammer, or the cutting of his indestructible scythe. Therefore, when a powerful opponent with more combat experience than Rogue, and who could also engage him head-on, appeared, it undoubtedly allowed Rogue to quickly discover his own weaknesses. Boom boom boom. Streaks of supersonic air-splitting strikes, accompanied by terrifying whistling sounds, constantly swept across most of the training ground. They struck Rogue's vibranium power armor like whirlwind missiles. Even though this level of ranged attack could only temporarily halt his advance, and didn't even cause much damage. Rogue, who had been suppressed by Fulgrim's kiting tactics for quite some time, had to adjust his combat strategy. Buzz buzz buzz, only to see his thick arms, encased within the vibranium shell, suddenly vibrate. Metal rings, emitting buzzing sounds, rapidly orbited his massive body. The instantly formed metal spiral storm also quickly negated the continuous barrage of supersonic air-splitting strikes. At the same time, Rogue casually tossed aside a power hammer from his palm and suddenly unleashed Shadow Step. The entire person, now wielding only the standard issue scythe, completely transformed into a wisp of dark shadow. He rapidly began teleport-like blinks towards Fulgrim. The next second, as Rogue's massive body abruptly materialized on the metal floor. Some of his offensive movements already carried many of Fulgrim's combat habits. This caused Fulgrim, whose white hair danced in the wind, to subconsciously raise an eyebrow. The sonic blade, gripped tightly in his giant palm, was instead swung with broader, more sweeping motions. Bang bang bang. At this moment, the standard issue scythe, empowered by a blue disruptive field, clashed fiercely with the indestructible sonic blade again and again. And each time the two melee weapons made contact, the standard issue scythe in Rogue's palm would become more damaged. But the distance between him and Fulgrim also grew closer and closer. However, just as this training session between the Primarch brothers was about to determine the victor, a deep voice from the edge of the training ground temporarily interrupted the offensive actions of both sides. Primarchs, please pause your combat training. At this moment, the massive Tyberos, piloting ancient Terminator armor, stood there and called out to Rogue and the others in a deep voice. Rogue and Fulgrim, who immediately stopped their offensive actions, exchanged a glance. The two of them, carrying the weapons in their palms, quickly moved their vibranium power armor to the edge of the training ground. My lords Primarch, approximately a dozen minutes ago, the augury arrays within the fleet detected the presence of a large civilian merchant vessel. This was not a major issue in itself, the entire fleet has encountered similar situations countless times. Under normal circumstances, we would make initial contact with the other party to see if they needed assistance, and then decide whether to plunder about 1/10 of their material storage based on the situation. Tyberos quickly said to the two Primarchs in front of him. However, our repeated attempts at communication have received no response. Based on past experience, either this civilian merchant vessel has been raided by orc pirates, or it has already been occupied by squats. And in order to reduce unnecessary personnel losses, I did not dispatch a combat squad to investigate the situation, but instead directly chose to have the fleet bypass them and continue sailing. But strange things also happened. That civilian merchant vessel, which originally showed no activity, actually followed behind our fleet, and didn't even care about the warning laser array fire. As soon as Tyberos's words fell, Rogue, frowning slightly, said to the other party, "A civilian merchant vessel that neither declares its identity nor acts in such a sneaky manner, and is also in the dangerous shipping lanes of the Imperium's dark side, even if it's not squats, it could be other alien races. Wouldn't it be better to just sink it?" And facing the Primarch's question, Tyberos, whose pale dead face didn't show much emotion, suddenly shifted his gaze, his dark eyes fixed on Fulgrim. "My Lord Primarch, we originally thought so too, but just before we were about to fire, the other party, after a long silence, directly sent a very ancient warrant of trade through the communication channel, and the signature on it is from Lord Fulgrim." At this moment, Fulgrim, widening his eyes slightly, asked Tyberos in a deep voice. "Captain Tyberos, are you sure you didn't see it wrong? In my memory, I personally issued very few warrants of trade, and most of them were given to those who defected too." Fulgrim's words were not finished. But both Rogue, who was standing aside, and Tyberos instantly understood the meaning. The next second, Rogue, squinting his eyes, suddenly sneered. Lost in thought, he turned to Fulgrim and said, "Fulgrim, do you think it might be another guy playing tricks on us?" Fulgrim slightly shook his head, scattering his white hair. he said in a calm tone. Little brother, instead of constantly guessing here, we might as well go to the bridge to take a look. Although neither of us has sensed anything with our bloodline, we can't rule out that possibility. As soon as the other party's words fell, Rogue, nodding slowly, activated his vibranium power armor. He quickly walked towards the direction of the flagship's bridge with Fulgrim and Tiberos. Not long after, the group arrived inside the vast bridge, filled with countless crew members and servitors. Buzz buzz buzz. And at this moment, a burst of evil whispers, full of malice and allure, suddenly echoed throughout the communication channels and projection devices inside the entire bridge. Heh, everyone says that a counterfeit is a good thing, but why doesn't anyone ask me, the real body, for my opinion? My dear brothers. At the same time, countless data codes and bridge equipment seemed to fall into an uncontrollable state of chaos. And within each unauthorized projection device that was activated, a massive body quickly emerged, seated upon a bloody throne formed from the corpses of countless mortals. At this moment, whether it was Lorgar and the others who had just arrived inside the bridge, or the mortal crew members present, they all clearly saw that familiar figure exuding an aura of seductive evil. It was none other than the true demon Primarch, the fallen phoenix of the Imperium, Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh. Traitor. At that moment, Fulgrim, instinctively gripping the sonic blade in his palm, let out a low, furious roar. His expression was one of immense anger as he stared at himself, the human traitor, wishing he could immediately rush forward and fight him to the death. However, it was Lorgar, standing to the side, who was comparatively calmer. With a detached expression, he raised his Auramite hand, blocking Fulgrim's chestplate, signaling him not to be rash. At the same time, he turned his gaze to Typhus, who was following beside him. It had to be said that Typhus was worthy of being Lorgar's most trusted confidant, having followed him the longest. The muscles on his deathly pale face twitched slightly. One of his ceramite hands, hanging by his side, subtly made a gesture of launching and then exploding, as if understanding Lorgar's intent. After receiving Lorgar's confirming gaze, Typhus nodded heavily and immediately activated his ancient Terminator armor, turning and rushing out of the bridge. Tisk tisk, don't be so tense, my brothers. I didn't bring any manpower, nor do I intend to initiate a boarding action. Even this temporary body is just a useless shell hastily conjured by a devout follower through a sacrificial ritual. Just then, Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh, as if sensing something, once again revealed a seductive smile filled with endless malice. He seemed to be able to see Lorgar and his clone inside the bridge through the endless void in the layers of the heavy hull. First, I must congratulate our little brother. I heard you actually captured Perturabo, that inflexible fellow. What a pity, I never had the chance to harm him again. It would have been great if he had fallen into my hands. However, be careful. Those Gene sons of his, entrenched on the Iron World, are searching everywhere for your whereabouts. Don't worry, I will definitely tell them your fleet's coordinates. Being able to personally witness you two sides killing each other will at least bring me some stimulating sensation. The deep voice of Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh echoed throughout the bridge. And a large number of mortal crew members who were retreating outwards had to desperately block their ears, barely alleviating the terrifying torment of the demonic sound filling their ears. Even so, squads of Astartes battle brothers who quickly rushed over still executed many mortal crew members suspected of being corrupted by chaos on the spot, preventing greater hidden dangers and problems within the flagship. However, at this moment, Lorgar, who had no time to care about the fate of the mortals, suddenly grinned coldly. He slowly activated his Auramite power armor and took a few steps forward. His cold gaze fixed on the clear projection of Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh, he said indifferently. Fulgrim, did you go through so much trouble just to mock us? Tell me, traitor, are you jealous? Are you jealous that a clone far inferior to you can obtain the Emperor's forgiveness and return to the embrace of the human Imperium, while you, a demon prince with only a broken body left, can only cower under Slaanesh's protection every day, wagging your tail like a dog? Tisk tisk tisk, don't you think that's very pathetic? Or has it been so long that you no longer have the birth of such emotions? At that moment, Lorger's sarcastic words made Fulgrim standing to the side couldn't help but take a few more glances. And the seductive smile on Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh face completely stiffened. After his face became increasingly gloomy. That malicious, deep voice once again resounded throughout the interior of the bridge. Sharp-tongued little fellow. Did Dorn's mouth grow back on your body? Do you think you can truly resist us just because you managed to capture Perturbo by luck? The other brothers are waiting for an opportunity in the warp, ready to come and find trouble for you at any time. However, if you are willing to hand this counterfeit over to me, then I can help you block them. After all, the great Slaanesh is also happy to see the plans of the other gods completely fail. The words from Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh slowly echoed in the ears of Lorger and Fulgrim. And Lorger, whose facial expression became increasingly cold, said without hesitation. It seems you really came for the clone. I can also tell you, either you personally board the ship and see who lives and who dies in the end between the three of us, or get back to your territory and play with Slaaneshi greater demons. Now, is my answer clear enough for you? As soon as Lorger's voice fell, he didn't wait for Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh inside the projection to speak again. He quickly used the communication channel to say to Typhus in a deep voice. Typhus, is the Nova cannon I wanted ready? Send him on his way directly. Primarch, the Nova cannons on the flagship and several cruisers are ready, and can fire at any time. At this moment, Lorger's cold gaze once again fixed on Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh, whose face was becoming increasingly ugly, inside the projection device. He shouted without hesitation, "Fire!" Rumble! Along with a roar and tremor that could be clearly felt even inside the flagship. Outside the heavy bulkhead, in the cold, dark depths of space. The flagship, which had already adjusted its fleet formation to a suitable angle, and several cruisers quickly fired huge metal slugs accelerated to the extreme from the positions of their bows. In just a few seconds, the large civilian merchant ship where Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh was located was forcibly torn apart by the metal slugs that arrived in an instant, and quickly smashed into a large amount of metal wreckage. Immediately afterwards, streams of energy explosion light that looked incomparably magnificent rapidly spread towards the cold void within hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The power was so great that it even completely vaporized those metal wrecks into even smaller cosmic dust. And before the projection device inside the flagship completely interrupted the transmission of the image, Fulgrim the demon prince of Slaanesh, with his massive body sitting in the throne of flesh, did not show any panic. He just stared intently at Lorger and Fulgrim, slowly squeezing out an increasingly distorted and ferocious smile from the corner of his mouth. Heh, then see you later, my brothers. Even though a considerable amount of time had passed since the Nova cannon's firing, lingering within the frigid void were still brilliant scars stretching over hundreds of thousands of kilometers. If one were to stand at the observation porthole of a ship and gaze into the distance, those lacking sufficient knowledge might mistake it for witnessing a series of bright stars still in the process of blooming. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the name Nova Cannon. However, at present, a portion of the mortal crew within the flagship had no inclination to appreciate the magnificent scenery outside. The expressions on each of their faces remained numb. Their gazes, either sorrowful or gloomy, were fixed deep within the corridors of the upper decks. Occasionally, they would brush past Astartes clad in power armor and wielding bolt guns, passing by the silent crowds. Approximately several hours later, dozens of servitors thoroughly cleaned the metallic floors of the remaining bloodstains and headless corpses. The numb-faced crew had no choice but to return to the seemingly unchanged interior of the bridge. They quickly checked if the equipment had been damaged, skillfully manipulating countless complex technological devices. Once the entire massive fleet had set sail again, Roel and Fulgrim jointly issued a broadcast in the name of the Primarchs, mourning the hundreds of crew members who had sacrificed themselves, while also praising the loyalty and faith of the more mortal crew members. Even though this was merely a painless and insignificant verbal encouragement, To some extent, it greatly alleviated the sadness and anxiety of the mortal crew members. It was even enough to support them in continuing to fight to the death for the Imperium of Man and even the Emperor. Inside a large warehouse located in the mid-level deck of the flagship, dozens of tech priests and a large number of automated servo robots were carefully constructing a scaled-down prototype of a faster-than-light engine under Doom's command. Even so, the entire prototype reached a size of about 50 meters, and the various mechanical parts installed inside numbered in the astronomical figures. And not far from Doom, Trazyn, holding the empathic obliterator in his arms, was staring with interest as Doom unleashed his psionic power without any warp signature, personally installing the important parts on the faster-than-light engine. "Hey, Doom, lad, what do you think the chances of your faster-than-light engine test succeeding are?" Trazyn suddenly asked the tall figure cloaked in dark green, shaking his silver skull head. As soon as the words fell, Doom, who had successfully completed part of the installation work using telekinesis, said without turning his head, "If it were in my home universe, I could guarantee it 100%, but here, I can't say for sure. After all, according to Lord Roel, the technological concepts of this universe have been controlled by the so-called Chaos Demigods, and they are also one of the Legion's enemies. If they want to secretly carry out some interference or tricks, even if I rack my brains, I may not be able to find the reason for the test failure." Hearing Doom's words, Trazyn faintly let out a low chuckle. He slowly approached the other party, holding the empathic obliterator, and deliberately lowered his voice and said, "Doom, lad, you may need special means to completely isolate psychic energy. We Necrons possess an ancient black stone technology called the Null Field, although I myself am not proficient in this, but my collection contains some technical products left behind by the Silent King, that is, the Necron Lord, and his Necron forces. If you are willing, I can have my tomb technicians build a small null field on the spot. The only function of this thing is to forcibly eliminate all psychic energy within its range. Of course, this invisible energy field is harmless to mechanical creations, but it is a terrifying method that will slowly obliterate the souls and consciousness of psychic beings like humans, and it is also one of the ways the Necrons resist chaos. However, you, a human from another universe, may be an exception. You are a powerful psychic, but not a psychic being in the true sense." At this moment, Trazyn's words caused Doom to temporarily stop paying attention to the construction steps of the faster-than-light engine. He slightly activated his silver power armor to move a step, and the head, with its face covered by a cold iron mask, stared at the other party and said, "There is no free lunch in the universe, Trazyn. Since you are willing to contribute such valuable technology, then you must have something you want, right?" Before Doom could finish speaking, Trazyn, who chuckled again, said without any concealment, "Haha, if I, Trazyn, said that I was happy to help others, then surely no one would believe it. Although I would also like to see what kind of sparks your humans will create with other alien races after mastering something that can change the situation in the galaxy, most of the time, I still have to stand on my own side. I can build a null field for your test plan, but you must continuously persuade your Primarch to allow me to explore your universe. If necessary, I can even hand over all the Tesseract labyrinths in advance, and go there with just this metal body." At this moment, Doom, who had pondered slightly, temporarily interrupted Trazyn's words. He said to the other party earnestly, "Trazyn, perhaps in your eyes, my home universe is an unexploited treasure world, but I can tell you that the physical rules there, or even the true underlying logic, are more inclined to concentrate all power on oneself. In other words, my home universe is probably more dangerous than you imagine. In fact, as far as I personally know, there are no less than 10 human powerhouses who can simply match or even surpass a Chaos Greater Demon in terms of combat power, or who can independently resist a space marine fleet. This is still what we can temporarily come into contact with. There are even more wild cards who are unwilling to pay attention to us or live in seclusion in certain dimensional planes. You always think that the Primarch is not letting you go to my home universe because he wants to wait for a price and take the opportunity to sell it for a good price. I cannot deny that the Primarch does not have this idea, but perhaps he is really doing it for your own good. After all, based on the many rumors I have heard about you, it seems that you have completely offended even the people within your own race, right? At this moment, Doom's words caused Trazyn in front of him to temporarily fall into a silent state. However, in the next second, the deep eye sockets of Trazyn flickered with a few faint green lights. He continued, Doom, lad, alarmist talk will not sever my ideals and determination, and I have no right to speak if I have not personally inspected it. Between you and me, can we be more frank? Are you willing to help me with this favor? To be honest, I personally have nothing to lose, so if you can provide some basic technology about the Necrons, then I can try to persuade the Primarch. Of course, I cannot guarantee that I can definitely succeed. That's right, Doom, lad, we have a deal, happy to cooperate. Inside Roche's private palace, Fulgrim, clad in purple gold power armor, was exchanging ideas with Roche beside him, discussing the upcoming battle missions. The Primarch's fleet had now patrolled the Far East sector for long enough, saving one Imperial world after another from near destruction. Although the casualties among the Astartes were not optimistic, all of this was not without merit. Therefore, Roche believed it was time for them to change direction and begin advancing towards the Ultima Segmentum, which was also divided by the Great Rift. However, the only problem was that the Primarch's fleet would need to rely on luck to enter the Ultima Segmentum. Because the navigators, located in the dark side of the Imperium, could not see the light from the Astronomicon of Terra and could only grope their way through blind jumps in the warp. Dong, dong, dong. Just then, with a series of heavy footsteps coming from power armor, Doom, draped in a dark green cloak over his ceramite shell, his entire tall frame faintly radiating green light, slowly entered the interior of the private palace. Doom, let me guess, Trazyn chose to bribe you with Necron technology to persuade me. Speaking of which, I've always been curious, why does everyone who delves deeply into Necron technology gradually emit green light? How do I vaguely remember that Archmago's call is also in this situation? At this moment, Roche, shifting his gaze from the star chart, stared at Doom approaching and said calmly. Fulgrim, standing aside, also glanced at the trusted subordinate of his Primarch brother. Deep within his beautiful eyes, something seemed to be recalled, and a fleeting sigh escaped his lips. Lord Roche, Trazyn probably has no other tricks left, so he can only choose to place his hopes on me. He not only provided me with some basic Necron technology, but is also willing to escort the experimental testing of the warp drive. Currently, he is leading a group of tomb technicians to build a small null field. As for your question, it's actually because I tried to install some newly made Necron technology inside the power armor, rather than saying that something strange has happened to me. After all, Necron technology is quite materialistic. Hearing Roche's teasing, Doom, who was bowing slightly to the two Primarchs, said with a light smile. Roche simply shook his head at this. He said to Doom with a calm expression, "You can take Trazyn's sugar coating and return the cannonball to him. As for the other party's psychological endurance, you can gauge it yourself. Try to squeeze out Trazyn's inventory as much as possible, but be careful to leave him a glimmer of hope. Moreover, as far as I know, the Necron null field is extremely dangerous. Ordinary mortals can hardly resist for long. Astartes may not have any problems, but they must also be more careful." After Doom nodded slightly, he also reported to Roche and Fulgrim on the progress of the warp drive construction. However, just as Doom, having finished his report, was about to turn around and leave this place to continue researching Necron technology, he was called out again by Roche, who seemed to have remembered something. Only to see Roche flip his adamantium palm. 3 gleaming golden throne gelt immediately appeared in the sight of Fulgrim and Doom. Then, he briefly explained the purpose and simulated experience of the throne gelt to the two people in front of him. "Now that there are no large-scale rescue wars and no one is bothering us, I want to take you on a simulated experience. These currencies obtained through prayer support are the activation ceremony. Let me state in advance that, because this mode will be carried out under the protection of the Emperor, we will not fall into true death, but some attacks targeting the soul and consciousness itself, or chaos corruption issues, still need to be treated with more caution. After Rorschach finished speaking, he handed the throne gelt in his palm to the two people in front of him respectively. Doom and Fulgrim casually took it, and carefully examined the palm-sized golden throne gelt. Next, the two people, who trusted Rorschach immensely, under the other party's guidance. Together, they threw the constantly tumbling and rotating throne gelt into the air. Ding! Simulation starting. Current possessed identity. Rorschach Space Wolf 13th Great Company Captain, Eye of Terror Black Fortress in Battle Rorschach Cipher Lord Black Fortress Infiltration. Current companions. Doom Normal Primarch Fulgrim Good Normal. Please select the identity and companions to descend upon first. If refused, will descend randomly. Identity selection has been refused, companion selection has been made. Simulation restarting. You are already in the Warhammer universe, will randomly select the time and location for you to descend. Time. Location. Forge World Gallia. You have successfully descended inside a forge factory full of rubble. You suddenly opened your eyes. Your keen beast senses have already smelled the strong stench of the green skin orcs, and your ears have also heard their increasingly noisy strange cries. You casually pulled out the green light entwined blood scythe from the resource storage page. At the same time, humming metal 10 rings also flew rapidly around the top of your head. You did not see the familiar figures of Doom or Fulgrim around you. After you carefully observed the strange environment in front of you, you immediately drove the adamantium power armor and launched a charge towards the direction where the green skin orcs were gathered. You, as a whole person, smashed the extremely thick factory wall like a humanoid siege hammer. As countless gravel flew away, you also instantly saw batches of green skin orcs, whose numbers were difficult to count, wandering back and forth on the nearby dilapidated streets. Without any hesitation, you fired the metal 10 rings that rotated back and forth towards the green skin orcs who were constantly roaring. You suddenly moved the magnetic boots under your feet, and the huge body instantly turned into wisps of dark shadows, and then heavily landed in the central position of a large number of green skin orcs. Chi. In an instant, countless green skin orcs' broken limbs and scarlet blood continued to lift into the air. The blood scythe, which you swept up with force, would chop dozens or even hundreds of green skin orcs crowded together into broken corpses all over the ground with each strike. In just a few minutes, thousands of green skin orcs within your line of sight were completely slaughtered by you, leaving no one alive. Ordinary green skin orcs, unless there are too many of them, no longer pose any pressure on you now. You slammed the green skin blood stained on the blood scythe, and after recalling the metal 10 rings, you immediately drove the adamantium power armor and ran quickly forward. You plan to first find the survivors on this forge world to see if you can find Doom and Fulgrim. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.